Hello everyone and welcome to Techstrong TV. Today is Thursday, July 21st, and I'm your host, Natan Solomon. Stay tuned for some incredible interviews with some awesome people from companies across the industry. I'll start by bringing you the biggest headlines from across the tech industry in our Techstrong News Recap. We then bring you to RSA, where Alan interviewed Brian Reed, the Chief Mobility Officer at NowSecure. NowSecure's mobile application security services offer a full suite of security testing tools and training. Brian and Alan also discuss how NowSecure enables devs to write code securely. Also at RSA, Alan met up with Ian Hutchinson, who is head of sales at Duplo Cloud. They discussed Duplo Cloud's low-code, no-code approach, which ensures security compliance. Next, we have a special RSA edition of Techstrong Women. Our hosts Charlene O'Hanlon and Tracy Bannon are joined by Charity Wright of Recorded Future and Chris Bondi of Momodo for an in-depth discussion on job roles in IT and cyber. They also dive into where equity and diversity is reflected in the workforce versus where it's reflected in leadership. Then, we have an interview with Charlene at RSA, where she talked with Jeff Hudson, the CEO of Venafi. In this interview, they talk about machine identity management, digital transformation, and Venafi's open source project. Next, we bring you an interview between Mitch and Tom Barton, who is head of data at Contino. In this interview, Tom outlines the steps required to grow your business through modernization and why it's critical to have a business data strategy. Finally, we have two editions of View with Vizard. In the first, Mike talks with Raj Datta, CEO of Oak9, about how the company will use $8 million in additional funding to advance DevSecOps adoption. In the second, Mike interviews Dotan Horovitz, Principal Developer Advocate for Logs.io. In this interview, Dotan shines a light on the dark side of open source software licensing and what was truly an incredible discussion. That's what we have coming up for you here on Techstrong TV. Let's get the show started. Enjoy.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
Hi, today is Thursday, July 21st, and here are the headlines. First in news, Microsoft has launched a platform to train the artificial intelligence systems of autonomous aircrafts. The platform, titled Project AirSim, is essentially a flight simulator for drones, which companies can use to train and develop software controlling them. The platform will make it possible to test flights that would otherwise be too risky, such as flights near power lines. According to Microsoft, this also means that millions of flights can be simulated in just seconds. Project AirSim has grown out of an open source project with the same name, which has been used by numerous researchers. Microsoft's goal is to offer a free option for the platform, but it said more information will be disclosed closer to the release date. The project runs on Microsoft's cloud computing platform, Azure, and US firm Airtonomy has been given early access to the platform. It will surely be interesting to see how this develops and the role it will play in the future of autonomous aircrafts. Another tech innovation making headlines is the idea that human teardrops may be useful in spotting diseases. A team at the Wenzhou Medical University in China is working to demonstrate the potential of using tears to spot eye disease and even signs of diabetes. Biomedical engineer Fei Liu says it's possible that the droplets could open a window for scientists to peer into the entire body and one day even let people quickly test their tears at home. First, Liu's team collected tears from study participants before then adding a solution containing the tears to a device with nanoporous membranes. After the device vibrated the membranes and sucked the solution through, all that was left was small sacs called exosomes, which can provide useful intel on what's happening in the body. Through the study, the team was able to identify different types of dry eye disease, and they now want to use the same method to identify other diseases as well as depression or emotional stress. In another technological breakthrough, a British startup named Faradair is planning to develop and sell a hybrid electric passenger plane. The product is aimed at the regional aviation market. It would be able to seat 19 passengers and would be propelled by a fan driven by an electric motor. The necessary electricity would be provided by a small gas turbine, and it would also have a triple-level wing to provide extra lift. With such innovative technology, the Faraday design would allow short trips between cities, like from Manchester to London, for as little as 25 pounds. In more remote regions, the plane could avoid the need for major investments in road or rail lines. It plans to have the aircraft flying by 2025, with commercial use starting in 2027. In other news, Apple released a report outlining its strategy in digital health markets as they attempt to balance health and fitness features with traditional healthcare systems. The report marks the first time Apple has offered a comprehensive view of its approach to healthcare markets. It has also begun partnerships with institutions like the Stanford University School of Medicine to conduct large-scale medical studies. In the report, Apple emphasized the importance of providing a secure place for users to store their health and medical information, while also using tools like the Apple Watch to encourage users to improve their health. By collecting data, Apple is continuously working towards the Apple Watch being used to monitor health and improve it between doctor visits. Next, TikTok owner ByteDance is looking into self-designed chips as China searches for semiconductor self-sufficiency. The chips will be customized to deal with workloads related to ByteDance's multiple business areas, including video platforms, information, and entertainment apps. Although much of the world is suffering the effects of a large-scale semiconductor shortage, ByteDance doesn't plan on manufacturing chips for sale to other companies. With the exponentially growing demand for these chips, the social media company already has multiple job openings on its website for roles related to semiconductor design. The company's push into the chip market represents an increasing focus from companies to create chips for specific purposes, as well as a broader push from the Chinese government to become stronger in the production of this essential technology. On Security Boulevard, we have an article discussing a new family of ransomware dubbed Havana Crypt. Havana Crypt makes up part of more than 4.4 million ransomware threats observed during the first quarter of 2022, a 37% uptick in threats over the previous quarter. Ransomware constantly uses ever-changing tactics to deceive victims, and Havana Crypt is no different, disguising itself as a Google software update. However, posing as an update is easy to do and is quite common. Those trained to recognize this type of ransomware can easily do so. Additionally, the article gives a brief overview into how Havana Crypt operates on an infected machine. On Container Journal, we have an article talking about securing containers at scale. This article addresses the burning question faced by many DevOps teams. How do you ensure the technologies you are using to secure software within containers are keeping pace with both business and security? The article runs through a range of topics from open source software to container management to DevSecOps and container security, so be sure to check that out. Finally, on DevOps.com, we have an article discussing how poor app remediation creates a vicious vulnerability cycle. The article analyzes a survey of 200 security professionals, which found that nearly 83% reported an increase in the rate at which apps are being deployed has led to an increase in the reintroduction of previously remediated vulnerabilities. The article also references the Log4j shell vulnerability, which shows how flawed the current process for building and deploying patches is. To learn more, visit devops.com. And that's today's headlines.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, we're back here live streaming from Moscone West for the RSA conference. We're on what they call Broadcast Alley. You know, there's 20-some thousand people here this year at RSA, and there's no end to the amount of sessions and keynotes and workshops and training and God knows parties. But let me tell you what really is, for me, special about RSA, and that's the people. You know, we were here in 2020 at the end of, right at the beginning of COVID. Mm-hmm. We didn't even really understand, but people were getting sick. And then, of course, last year, it was virtual only, and this year it's been postponed, but we're here now. And you forget the people-to-people connection of people you've met and know, and friendships you've struck over the years in the industry. And so for me coming here this year and seeing friends I haven't seen in 2 years and understanding, you know what? Just because we weren't in suspended animation with COVID.
No, we were
Right?
just stuck in.
We were stuck in our
the unlimited
houses.
Zoom loop.
Right, and Zoom. But life goes on and things go on and, you know, our families and our lives and life stories go on. Some folks we won't see again, unfortunately. But this guy right here is a friend and I was happy to see him. May or may not recognize him because this is the first time I've ever seen him not in a vendor shirt.
Yeah,
He's
you
wearing
got it.
like a real shirt.
I'm like a civilian
You
again.
look like a
I lost
civilian.
100 pounds since I saw you
Right.
last, and
So
I'm wearing
do you
civilian
not have
clothes.
enough shirts that say
No, actually, today was my day to go meet with people on the show floor. So I went incognito, which is why I'm like dressed like this. It's been a good event.
Absolutely. If you don't recognize, this is my friend Brian Reed. Brian, of course, is one of the driving forces, creative forces behind Now Secure.
Yeah.
And most of you may know Now Secure, but if you don't, Brian, give them a quick.
Sure. So Now Secure is a mobile application security company. We have a full suite of security testing tools, training, pen testing services that people use, but we're mobile first and mobile only. So we were born when iOS and Android was born as a mobile forensics business. So we've been doing this for 13, 14 years.
Right,
So if you think about age as a high growth startup, and you and I were talking about I think the last interview I had was with you 2 years ago at RSA.
Yeah.
And so it's great to be back again and see
It really
people and
is
the old
good.
friends.
It's good to see you. And, you know, we losing 100 pounds is a great thing. Sometimes we lose it in ways we don't want to, but that's okay. It's still good to lose.
COVID treated me not well.
Yeah, COVID's a tough one.
It's all good, though.
Yep, I'm glad you're here and well. You know, things are growing, though, and they continue to grow. And for you and the company, a crucial partnership with GitHub is really kind of shaping or reshaping.
Driving the business substantially. You know, when we think about working together with DevOps.com, which is a great resource built up over the years, we moved from sort of security testing for security people and tools into security testing built into pipelines. So if you're building a mobile app, whether it's iOS or Android, we can automatically test that. And over the years, as we've been building our business, we've been working more and more with development companies, development tools, and developers. And late last year, we entered a partnership with GitHub, where we're within the GitHub Advanced Security environment. We're the only dynamic automated security testing platform that plugs in as a GitHub action into the repo. So for a developer now, on any push, on any pull, on any line of code they write, they get mobile app security scanning. And most of the world is focused on web and serverless and cloud. Well, we bring the mobile piece into that world, and that's been just growing like a rocket, right? So
absolutely
enabling developers to write the code securely in the first place, scan it in the repo, check it on the pull request. All of that now is reducing friction and driving a lot more secure apps in the App Store.
So, you know, Brian, those 13 years, you and I know each other probably 4 or 5 years now, maybe more. And you mentioned when, DevOps.com and over the years and what we've seen. Well, I'll tell you, the mission has changed a little bit for you. Not for you personally, but for
for the company.
For the company. And not just for your company, but the whole the whole mobile app world, right? Where there was a time, I remember when I first did DevOps.com, mobile app development was a thing. It was a thing unto itself. Right? As you mentioned, there was Android and there was iOS, but it was clearly separate and apart from let's call it non-mobile.
Yeah, well, mainstream web.
Mainstream web.
Right.
Then we saw sort of the primacy of the mobile app. Like a lot of people who said, look, why do I need something that works on people's mobile devices, and just a mobile-friendly website doesn't cut it.
Right.
I need the mobile app. And we saw sort of the primacy or the golden age of this. And that fundamentally changed the way developers develop. They didn't develop mainstream app first and then port it to the mobile. A lot of stuff started being developed
Mobile first.
Mobile first.
Yep.
And now that creates a different set of security and governance and compliance challenges
Absolutely.
than if you did it was kind of backwards a little
Build web,
bit.
then build mobile.
Right.
Yeah.
And and you guys had to kind of adapt to that and
Go through the cycle. Yeah.
go through
Yeah. I
that
think
cycle.
it's been very interesting to watch what's happened. So, when I first got started with Now Secure many moons ago, mobile was often hanging off the side of IT. It was hanging off the side
that's
of
a good way.
development. It might have been hanging off the side of security. And oftentimes there are these fast-moving teams. What's interesting in a lot of big enterprise companies is the mobile team is actually the first DevOps team because the rapid innovation cycles necessarily on mobile. If you think about like a web browser, how often does HTML, CSS evolve as a spec? How often does Java get updated? OS is on mobile devices. Every year
day.
there's a big new push.
Right, well, at least
and there's
once a
patches all
year.
the time. But,
Yeah.
iOS 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13,
15.
right? Now we're on 15, right? So almost every year there's an OS update, which creates new features, new devices. And so that refresh cycle is a lot faster. And so what we've seen now is that most organizations have a mobile presence in some way, shape, or form, whether it's mobile responsive or mobile native. Many of the companies we talk to, mobile is the spearhead for the customer. Customer has a mobile app in their hand, right? If you look at Starbucks has more money they're doing through a phone transaction than almost any other company, right? Some 20, 30% of all Starbucks revenue is sourced on a mobile device. And so even the traditional brick and mortars now recognize that mobile is the best way to interface with the customer. But you have to protect the customer. And I'll give you an example. In the news on Monday this week, Tim Hortons, for you Canadian lovers. So I'm an old BlackBerry guy. So
Okay.
I have a soft spot for Tim Hortons in Canada. Tim Hortons got slapped and fined by the Canadian government because their mobile app was harvesting data on their users and continuously
I
monitoring
read
their
this
whereabouts.
story, actually, yes.
Train wreck, right? So
Absolutely.
that's where security and privacy overlap. They were violating privacy rules and they had security vulnerabilities wrapped in it and they got slapped by the government. And so Tim Hortons was trying to use mobile to better serve their customers, but they made serious mistakes in how developers implemented what they did. And so now they got slapped. And we've seen that over and over again over the years, is trying to find the right way to fast innovate on mobile, build security in as you go, right? And have great outcomes. And like working with GitHub has been fantastic because now as the developers are writing the code, they're making sure it's secure in the repo that they're already working.
Well, that's almost that whole GitOps thing, right?
Yeah.
Where in some ways it's moving left, right? Where look, if I could get to that code while it's still in the repo, as we're putting it into that CI/CD pipeline, and get to it there, fix it there, test it, fix it there. It's a hell of a lot easier than doing it afterwards.
In prod. Yeah,
Yep.
I mean, you can imagine the fire drill going on at Tim Hortons right now.
Well,
They
you
re-engineered
betcha.
their app, right?
I would think
you look at the
that.
economic studies. So we've helped customers move from semi-annual releases, 3-month releases, to 2-week releases, to 1-week releases, and drive innovations. You've seen, like with COVID, everybody was stuck at home. So you saw the rise of the food delivery apps. And a lot of organizations that were brick and mortars that had to turn into mobile retailers.
Yep.
Right? So all of those things are impacting where the drive is.
Absolutely.
And what's great about it now is the technology between automation and integrations are there to enable a much more mature, security built-in, security first kind of approach.
Security first?
Mobile first, security first. Yeah. Interesting way to think about it.
That is.
Yeah.
As a security guy, I'm honored.
Yeah. Well, that doesn't mean everybody thinks that way. I mean, if you're in a regulated
No,
market.
but hey, man,
If you're in a regulated market, you're going to think that way. But what's happening, and what's really interesting about some of our largest customers and our fastest moving customers, they both have one thing in common, which is security can't be the department to know. Security needs to become an enabler for the developer to get their work done. And that's what you want to call it, shift left or whatever the language you want to use. How does security and privacy now enable development to get their work done so they can meet the business needs and not step on a landmine like Tim Hortons did?
Absolutely.
So,
Hey, Brian, let me ask you another question, though. Do you think we see a time when sort of we see the line blur between calling it mobile development versus calling it
development.
development?
Yep. For a number of our customers, they're now mobile first, which is interesting. To a large extent, actually, the backend's always the same. So you have the whole world of APIs, API security, backend infrastructure, cloud, and then you're hanging mobile and web off the front. The interesting thing about it is a lot of this is really what's the user experience and what's omni-channel mean in terms of the transparent experience on a device, a laptop, a browser, a kiosk, kind of wherever you go. What is interesting is where the operating systems are going. So, for example, if you have a TV at home, it's probably running Android. All those little apps on your TV, that's Android. And so you're kind of seeing this expansion with IoT of mobile-centric application-oriented scenarios on devices like your car dashboard with like CarPlay and Google Play in the dashboard on the TVs and everything else. And so you see Apple and Google, the Android team at Google, they're both enabling more kinds of experiences.
And we're seeing that. I mean, well, I don't want to get my new cars. We have 2 new cars at home because we lease. It's not that I go out and just
hey, leasing is your friend. I've leased for years until my last car.
But they, both of them have both Android Play or whatever and Apple Play in it, and it amazes me how it's far superior to the phone. In some things, but there's really a lot of great integrations.
There can be, you got all the sensors in the TV, in the car, and the phone, right, and other devices like whether you're wearing an AirPod, and phone apps can take advantage of AirPod, and
it's also all gesture driven,
gesture and behavior driven. The old cars with the dial, you still reach in sometimes. You're looking for the dial that you can turn up the fan.
So we have the. I'll tell you offline.
I'm with you. I got one of those cars.
Pretty cool, yeah.
So, but if I can around what Apple and Google are doing, one really big thing that is impacting all of us is that Apple and Google are both working on security and privacy more than they ever have before.
Absolutely.
So this is where we're going to deviate from the web world.
Yeah.
Right. So we've seen Apple go full bore on privacy. Right.
Yes, they have. They're making that a difference maker.
They are, and so developers have had to adapt to that. In many instances, security teams are responsible for privacy.
But that was always, in my mind, anyway. That was always one of the allure of mobile, is that it's done right, it could be more secure than...
Yeah, the architecture of mobile is more secure than a PC, a laptop, or some of the other devices. The thing about mobile application security is you can write a good app and a bad app. I can do that for web, I can do that for mobile, I can do it for anything else. The nice thing about this device is it's harder for an attacker to do something to the device because of the nature of sandboxing and the way Apple designed it. The challenge, though, is this device is harvesting in the app a lot of data about me, and it's transmitted over the air. So can I intercept it on the carrier,
I'm going to
Wi-Fi, or
I was on an international carrier going to Europe a couple of weeks ago, and they gave you free Wi-Fi up to a gig. I said, a gigabit, that'll last me no problem.
1 hour later.
An hour later, I had transmitted again. It's not like I was watching movies.
No, it happens.
It was just
it's all the apps running in the background. It's how Apple and Google sync with their cloud. But in the land of how this is all evolving, there's something really interesting that Android's got going on, and Apple with privacy to a degree, is this whole idea of safety labeling. Right. And so when we look at like recent White House cybersecurity orders after all the security breaches and supply chain, safety labeling is coming. And actually, Android is leading the pack on all these technology platforms, web, mobile, cloud, or everything else. And so Google,
good to know.
Yeah, I mean, for those who are Android developers, listening along today, if you haven't noticed, go look at the safety labeling program that's going on at Google. So what they're doing is through the App Defense Alliance, they brought this notion of safety labeling. And so it's basically now Google developers will attest to the security and privacy like supply chain.
Now this is coming though, it's not here.
So phase 1 is public. So Google's published on their blog, and they're now making it possible for Android developers when they submit the app to list what level of safety and privacy their app does as part of it. And that program is now just getting started. There's a few hundred developers who've already started the work, and it's going to grow this summer.
It'll blossom.
And what's really cool about it is, so if I'm a developer, let's say I'm making an app, I don't know, it could be a financial app like a bank, it could be a gaming app, whatever that is. What's great about safety labels is if I have a safety label, then I can show my customers they can trust me. So now I have a feature that I can use to show why I'm better than the other guy.
Got
So
it.
I can imagine where the banks will be playing the one-upsmanship game of all of them wanting to have safety labels so you use their banking app. And you can imagine the same thing
It's
with
all-
retailers and
Well, no,
e-tailers
and you,
so
you
forth.
can't blame them though, because security has become a difference maker. It's been shown that and I think Apple's the poster child for this right
Yeah.
now. If you are going to lead with security and privacy, people like that. They take notice of it. It's
They are more and more, I think. And you know, there's been the various things that have happened in the world over the last 5 years that have driven this whole privacy initiative. You have GDPR in Europe, CCPA in California. There's privacy laws or regs coming in many of the states, you know, across the U.S. and other countries. Clear that Canadian Tim Hortons paying attention to it as well. So security and privacy are like this Venn diagram of overlap. And it's really kind of exciting to see Google kind of leading the way with, hey, we're going to bring this to Android. And because we do believe it's important that people should be able to
I got to
trust their
imagine
apps.
Apple won't be far behind.
Well, they've got privacy attestation in there too. So they were first with privacy, and Google will be first. Android will be first
With the tag.
safety labels.
Right.
And each of them are kind of moving us forward to realize that this is the number one device for most humans on the planet, and this thing is
And will
safe
continue
and
to be.
secure. Right, and people
Absolutely.
depend on the app experiences that they have on it.
People want to get more information on the company. Where do they go?
Yeah, come to nowsecure.com, nowsecure.com.
Brian, it truly is a pleasure to see you.
Good to see you
man.
again, especially after 2 years away. It's good to do
Absolutely. I hope to see you again soon.
this. Absolutely.
Let's not wait till next RSA, which is next April 24th and 27th. The banner's right there.
Look at that. It's date already.
But there's other places, maybe Black Hat or something.
We will
in
probably
August.
cross paths at Black Hat. You can definitely find us there, and we'll be in the Hacker Village too.
Very cool, man. Brian Reed here on, what are we on? Techstrong TV.
Techstrong TV. There you go. Right there on the board behind us. Thanks for having us.
Also on the board. Yes, we're going to take a break. We're at RSA. We're wrapping up our day 3 coverage. We'll be back in a minute. Bye-bye.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, back here live at RSA. It's Wednesday, day 3 of RSA week. You know, it's got to be getting close to 4 o'clock because I see the crowd streaming in here to Moscone West. I think there's a 3:55 keynote down there. So more people. You know, Moscone West is definitely a little quieter than Moscone North and South where the expo is. It's a little crazy there. It's about 25,000 people here, they say. So we'll see. Anyway, my guest for this segment is Ian Hutchinson. Ian is with Duplo Cloud, a DevOps as a service company. What are they doing in RSA, you ask? Well, we're going to jump into that right now. Hey, Ian, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Alan.
Good to have you here. So, look, we're probably uniquely situated to do this interview, being as we are DevOps.com and Security Boulevard. But let's you know, not everyone out here has probably heard of Duplo Cloud. Why don't we start with that?
Yeah, Duplo Cloud was founded in 2018, Series A funded company that we announced about 4 months ago. DevOps as a service is what we do. Most of the organizations that use us lean to us for all things security and compliance in the context of cloud infrastructure. So these organizations are on AWS, Azure, and GCP.
Yep.
And the talent gap on the security side is something that we think a lot about. And we've taken a low-code, no-code approach to infrastructure and infrastructure provisioning to help ensure security and compliance.
Absolutely. I think the security gap is not just in the cloud, it's through and through, but that's a whole nother interview. So, you know, Ian, DevOps is a service. When I started DevOps.com in 2013, we published 2014. There were a lot of people that were trying to run DevOps as a service because DevOps was hard. Much as people today run Kube as a service and stuff, because Kube is hard. One of the issues, though, is everybody wanted to jump on the bandwagon, and everyone was extending the definition of DevOps as a service to suit their own particular flavor of it, right? When you say DevOps as a service, what do you mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think about it, and the problem manifests itself at different layers. There's the networking layer. There's all of the cloud services that are growing every day. There's app provisioning with the advent of Kubernetes, serverless, so on and so forth. There's all the diagnostics tools that developers are using. There's CI/CD, and then there's security and compliance across the board. So when I think of DevOps as a service, I'm thinking about all the tasks that an individual, it may be a developer in an organization that is very sort of developer self-service oriented, where they're changing the environment that they're working in, where they're looking at those diagnostics, they're looking at those metrics.
Sure.
I'm thinking about all of the security controls. Like half of the work tends to come down to security, which is sort of the counterpoint to self-service. At a lot of companies, it's either the developer is too constricted and can't do what they want for security and compliance reasons, which are valid, or the everything's open, which has a different problem.
A whole different set of problems. So let's examine this a little bit. So it sounds to me like in your DevOps as a service scenario, it's really helping a lot of devs with the, if we can say, the ops end of the house, right? And you know, in DevOps, quite frankly, there is a lot thrown on the dev, and they need help with the ops, and they need help with the security. With my and I've obviously been doing DevOps a long time. I've been doing security 25 years. My personal experience and thought process is, it's not that developers don't want to do security, or that they don't want to. No one says, I want to develop insecure code, right? They want.
Agreed.
The problem is they often, A, don't understand the reasoning, the rhyme or reason to a lot of security, schemas. And then B, the tools they're given to use are not really geared to them. They're geared to security people who are doing that full time and have a whole different mindset. And that, nature abhors a vacuum. And that, I think, created those two kinds of things created the great opportunity for Duplo Cloud.
Yeah. And I think you're thinking about it the right way. I mean, even an individual that's been in security for 25 years will walk around the expo hall here at RSA and be surprised at you look at some of the vendors and you're like, okay, and that's different than this. How? There's just a lot of depth. Same goes in the cloud world.
Oh, yeah.
There's a ton of depth, whether you're AWS or GCP or on-prem.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, some organizations and the cloud partners specifically are looking to address the problem through education, which I think is an important part of the approach. But I think doing what we can for the developers is another area, because we can't count on them all to be security and infrastructure experts. So we got to make it easier for them.
Agreed. The real problem I have is, do you ever foresee a time where we will have enough security and infrastructure experts? I don't.
No, I don't. I don't. And
that's scary, isn't it?
Yeah. And I mean, I think when I look at like a typical engineering team or development team, where they have dedicated infrastructure specialists and dedicated security specialists, I think I get a little bit bummed at the ratio of resources that are focused and spending time on that. And it's not a win for anyone, because the whole DevOps movement, the developers were, felt bottlenecked.
Yeah.
And I don't think the answer is isolation and talking about these roles in silos.
No.
I think the answer is leveling up everyone. And I mean, specifically on the infrastructure side, not looking at any of the application vulnerabilities, application security, specifically on infrastructure, right? There are only a finite number of ways of configuring and provisioning infrastructure. It is a solvable problem.
Well, look, when I first, again, 2013, DevOps to a lot of people back then meant Chef, Puppet, or Ansible, which was supposed to solve that.
They were the pioneers.
You had your golden ticket, right? Your golden lineup, and boom, every single instance I spun up was going to be exactly the same to my golden specification, right? It didn't work like that as much as we thought it would.
I mean, containers, Kubernetes, the world has changed.
Well, but containers and Kubernetes killed Chef and Puppet and the Radio Star, but it still gave you that same ability to just, immutable infrastructure to spin up containers that would clones of the ones before. It shouldn't be that hard, but it is that hard, and it doesn't work the way I think a lot of people were hoping and thinking it would. The second piece of it is this, though, and this is someone who's a DevOps fan, right? I love DevOps, but the fact of the matter is, for a lot of organizations, DevOps became put more on the developer's plate, right? And the developers already had a full plate. We've seen the rise of SRE and these folks who are, doing more of the ops stuff, working with developers, trying to break down these silos and all of that stuff. But again, and I don't mean it in a bad way, but there's probably a minority of organizations that do that well.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think those that do it well, we talked about decentralizing the role. We talked about giving people what they need in order to be successful. I think fundamentally, the DevOps role goes away.
Well, some will tell you there was never such a thing as a DevOps role or a DevOps engineer.
Yeah, you do a career search and find the 120,000 open roles.
Well, exactly.
You're sort of.
Then you say, "What do you mean it doesn't exist?" Go ahead.
I think the good companies have that role integrated with their developers, working with them day to day. The great companies have eliminated that role altogether, and are looking at automation in order to continue putting that in place. And I mean, Drupal Cloud, fundamentally, when we have these conversations with mature companies that are advanced in this journey, it comes down to the security and compliance gap is the number one reason that, okay, we've automated all this, it's working. We're making deployments regularly. We've got, rolling deploys, we can fix issues, so on and so forth. We've got our infrastructure as code, we've got our CI/CD, they're content. But then all of a sudden they're selling to a public sector entity, and they need to take a whole new look at how they've approached security and compliance. Right. And then we look to repeat it all, but with that level of security and compliance in place.
Now, the fact that you're even offering this and doing this as a business model means that you obviously have that security and compliance expertise in-house that you are providing to your customers. I got to imagine that in itself is a hard number to fill.
Yeah, fundamentally, Drupal Cloud was founded to solve the DevOps problem. We took a look at it, and then we started looking at the compliance standards, PCI, NIST, the frameworks and what they were asking for, and said, you know what, if we're going to automate this, let's automate it in a way that really makes sense based on the security and compliance frameworks. Mm-hmm. And then I think that gave us a level of focus and an area where we could start with an application-centric perspective and do this over and over and over again with different organizations in a low-code, no-code way.
Got it. We've hit on a bunch of different things here, but you know what we didn't hit on? For people who want to get information on Drupal Cloud, what's the web address?
Yeah, DrupalCloud.com.
So it's DUPLO?
Yeah. Cloud.
Reading it off your shirt, I'm cheating. I'm sorry.
You're checking me out.
No, it wasn't. I would just make sure I spelled it right.
Yeah, DrupalCloud.com. There's a platform demo that goes in depth. It talks about the no-code approach. It talks about the Terraform provider. There's a mapping to HIPAA, to PCI, control by control.
Cool.
There's, when you're working with developers, you try and make it as easy as possible on them, and it's an area we're continuing to get better at.
So I got to ask you a question.
Sure.
And as someone who's has many years in security and more than a couple now in DevOps, you seem like there's a little bit of a kindred spirit there, where you started out all about DevOps, right? And providing DevOps as a service, and kind of was seduced by the dark side of security and compliance, recognizing that that's your customer's biggest area of need. And really the company is now sort of, rallied around that as that's the main thrust of it.
Yeah, I mean, your question in there is around like how do we think about?
I mean, is that when you look back on it, is that wasn't the plan all along? I got to guess.
I mean, fundamentally, we were focused on how dev teams operate. We were focused on our customers, right? Those early champions and advocates that we were working with, and when they were getting their first, big customers who were asking them all sorts of questions that they were having a tough time answering, they were looking to us to guide them. So the product fundamentally didn't change. It was just enabling the customers to enforce the policies, the controls that they needed to be where they are.
Got it.
And then helping them communicate it to their customers, because ultimately that was the biggest thing. And it's to the point now where if you ask, a CTO of one of our customers why that they bought Duo Cloud, they will say, security and compliance. Absolutely, they remember. If you ask a developer, they'll say, what's security and compliance? Right?
And that's a beautiful thing if that's it, because if you could not obscure it, but if you could bury it that deep where it's just a tool that's helping them, they don't think of it as a security and compliance tool, you did a good job.
Yeah, and I think it frees up bandwidth to focus on application security, to focus on
other
CI/CD,
aspects,
focus on QA,
sure.
Focus on. I mean, work's not going away.
No, and there's always too much of it, right?
Yeah.
Ian, thanks for joining us, man.
Appreciate the
I
time.
know you were worried about having enough content. We could have spoke for another hour if we want.
Absolutely, anytime.
Go check out Duplo Cloud. DevOps as a service, security and compliance. We're live at RSA. We're going to be right back.
All right, welcome back to Techstrong TV live at RSA conference in San Francisco. Coming up now, we have a very, very special edition of the Techstrong Women series that we run on Techstrong TV quite a bit. My co-host Tracy Bannon from MITRE and I are very, very excited to have today's guests. To my immediate right is Charity Wright, who is cyber threat analyst over at Launch Darkly, or no, Recorded Future.
Recorded Future,
welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. I do appreciate it. Good stuff. And then Chris Bondi, who is the CEO of, is it Mimoto or Mimoto?
Mimoto.
Mimoto. Okay, great. I'm so glad to have you as well. We were all just meeting, and so we just kind of immediately sat down and just started gabbing because that's what we do, because we so enjoy just learning about each other, and because you learn about each other, you learn from each other, and I think that that's so important in this line of work for anybody. It doesn't really matter if you're male or female. Having the conversation is so very important. Wanted to first of all thank everybody here at RSA. So what a great day we've had so far, having conversations and just meeting people and just being here in person. What a great thing. What a great thing. Techstrong Women is a show where we talk about women in IT from the celebratory perspective. We really want to celebrate the successes of women in IT and in cybersecurity, and talking about the collective experience of women in the IT and cybersecurity space. So it's so great to have everybody live and in person. Normally we do this over Zoom, so it's great to have everybody here. I don't have an agenda for this show. I really just want to talk to you guys. I want to learn about you guys. I want to know, where you come from, what you're doing. Tell us about yourself. Charity, why don't you start us? Tell us about what you do as a cyber threat analyst over at Recorded Future and how you got to where you are.
Sure. I'm a threat intel analyst, and I worked within a pretty large research team. And well, first I'll tell you how I got started and how I got into this role. I started in the U.S. Army. I joined to be a linguist, and they assigned me to learn Mandarin Chinese.
Oh, wow.
So I got to spend a couple of years learning Chinese, and then I was stationed at the National Security Agency doing some pretty cool intelligence analysis there. Mm-hmm. And when I decided to transition out of the military, it's really not really sure, like, where am I going to go from here? And then I saw some threat intel jobs at cybersecurity companies. And I thought, well, I know nothing about cyber, but it's time to learn, because I really see cyber being the future of intelligence. And so I just jumped into a cyber threat intelligence role. And what we do is, we find out how the hackers are working, how they're getting into our networks, what tactics, techniques, tools they're using. But we're also diving into more than just technical intel. Mm-hmm. My particular role at Recorded Future involves analyzing Chinese influence operations, disinformation, coordinated, malign, state-sponsored disinfo, and also strategic level intelligence like geopolitics. Like, what are we going to do if China decides to invade Taiwan someday? How does that affect not only governments, but also enterprises around the world? So our clients rely on us for that very, very specific, mm-hmm. detailed, actionable intel to help protect themselves and their people.
Well, Charity, with this growing emphasis on influences, how do you influence a people group or a population? I'm really interested if you've been looking at some of the threats that come from the deepfakes. I've seen that from a corporate perspective. We also saw Zelensky's really poorly done deepfake, mm-hmm. right, where he's telling his comrades in arms to lay them down. Yeah. Is that something that you guys are also keeping your eyes on, or the deepfakes?
Absolutely. It's one of the emerging threats that we're keeping a close eye on. And we're trying to create technology and AI that can automatically detect a deepfake photo or video. That way, humans make mistakes. We can miss things. We have bias. Mm-hmm. So maybe it looks real to us, but there's some technical details in the photo or video that's easier for a computer to detect than it is for us. So that's definitely one of those trends that we're keeping a close eye on.
Well, that's been our final frontier, right? We learned that we couldn't always believe what we heard, mm-hmm. but I could, mm-hmm. You had to see it with your own eyes. Right. Well, now even if you see it with your own eyes, it can't be on a screen. I need to see it with my own eyes. So it's really, really changing that rapidly.
True. It's a challenging area of threats to analyze, because a lot of times it involves politics, it involves very sensitive issues, and you're talking about this stuff in the workplace. It can get a little awkward, and also we have to check each other's bias. For example, I'm an American, and I served in the U.S. Army and NSA. I work with people from all around the world that have different worldviews and different perspectives mm-hmm. on the same subject. And so it's great to have them kind of check me and go, well, you would think that because you're American. And that's fine with me. I'm like, oh, you're right. I never thought about it from this other point of view. Yeah. And I think that's really important, the diversity, to check these complex emerging threats.
That's definitely something that diversity is definitely something that we will be talking about, and that I want to learn more about, how your organization approaches this and a bias and so many different levels. So
yeah.
let's put a pin in that and
Yes.
get back to that. But Chris, why don't you tell us about yourself and your organization and how you got to where you are?
So Momodo analyzes every time a human interacts with the system to be able to, because as we often say, a credential, it's a fallacy to assume a credential is an actual person. And so we are analyzing to know that it is that person or it's not that person, and also contextually bringing that into it. I started as a reporter way long ago, and then moved into, sort of the arc was community, communications, marketing. And the reality is, the secret is I've been doing the same thing all along, which is asking follow-up questions. Like, I was always really good at tech. And so I worked a lot in DevOps and a lot in things that were community building. And it was because I asked follow-up questions. In fact, the thing that I would get scolded for repeatedly is I would always say, I'm not technical. And somebody would go like,
Stop. You're technical.
Yeah,
You're more technical than this person, less technical than that. We're all technical.
Yeah. Well, and the thing was, but I was like, well, I don't code. Then say you don't code. Because like you actually understand how all these things come together.
That's being technical.
And but it's because I always ask follow-up questions. Like, well, and how did that happen? And how do you do that? And
what's interesting is that we've had a number of amazing women on our show, and a number of them have started out in reporting or communications. So Melissa, I'm neglecting the name right now, but she started out and she was writing obituaries. And how that, yes, it was. And why that was so curious, because she's doing cyber work now, she found that she had to dive deeper into the person's life to come up with that story, to create the storyline on who they are and what they are. And she would then ask, well, they married, but where did they marry? Well, where did they meet? Right. And she would track back those things. So kind of a similar vein where you learn to ask a lot of questions. And I thought it was interesting.
That's fascinating.
Well, I think especially in the cybersecurity space, you have to ask those questions to get to wherever it is that you're going, whether it's understanding what the threat is or how the threat actors actually infiltrated the network or wherever. So I think those questions are very, very important. They're critical, actually. So, if you innately are the type to ask those type of questions, you're going to do very well in cybersecurity.
Well, and so how I ended up here was, it all ends up rolling in. And I had, I'd worked with my co-founder before, and I had, there was a problem, and there was it's because that's the other thing, like you always come up with a problem. And from having that back and forth of like, there's this problem he keeps seeing, and because it's not only understanding it's a person, but it's not, it is actually being able to catch the attack. So, which is what you do is, I'm really happy we're here, but I'm really glad when we're done because I have so many questions. So many questions that I'm like, when we're done, I can ask a question.
Can we cut to the question?
But, being able to, like, okay, like how can we address so there's ransomware. So how can we address that problem? And how can we address, so anytime there's a big breach, it's like, okay, SolarWinds, like, where could we have done that? Or, like I've become a groupie of breaches now, because I'm always like, and how did that happen? And, and who did what and how did that happen?
The true crime of the 20.
So you've got your URL bookmarked to Port Swigger, and you're out there every couple of days seeing what the latest breach is.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I feel like it's very important for, as I said before, to ask those questions, to almost be like annoying with them. It's like the why, but why, like the kid, with his mom is like, why, mom, why, and so I just my thought, I feel like women do that much better. We're okay. We're much better at asking the questions, and we're not afraid. And Chris, you and I were talking about it before. We're not afraid to say it. If we get to a particular point where, we need to get answers, we need to know something, or we need to, get our feelings known. We're gonna ask the questions.
But don't you also think that As much as I am an advocate for equality, I also recognize and actually applaud, right? Celebrate the differences and the way that women's brains tend to work and the way that men's brains tend to work. And it's not for everyone, it's not a broad brushstroke, but in generalities, women seem to be able, I've noticed in their career progressions, more women being in the data analytics area, more in the database and data organization, because there seems to be this way to see all of the marbles and start to form them into something that I don't necessarily, maybe it's pattern finding. I'm not sure, but I seem to notice that more with women than
that would be my career progression. And and even though it hasn't been in data, it has definitely been and how do all the, I always describe it as like I'm fascinated with you do this and this happens, and you do this and this, so that if I put these things together and it is, and that is exactly that's how ecosystems work. That's how, that's how you grow a business. That's how you find, in fact, the other piece of that ends up being with threat intelligence. And it's fascinating to me about what you do is because I really think that we're at a point, and we've been past this point of it's life critical that governments and corporations work together because there are, whether it is hospitals, whether it's infrastructure, it's, whether it's toppling of governments, that without them working together, we're at a critical point now.
Absolutely. Those partnerships are so important. And I wanted to follow up on what you were saying about how women contribute in very different ways. Something that I've observed in threat intelligence is that myself and some of my other female colleagues, the analysts, we tend to follow our intuition and our instincts in our investigations. And sometimes I just can't put my finger on what is pushing me towards this angle. And a lot of the gentlemen I work with, they're more logical about things, which is very useful in its own way. But sometimes they're like, but how did you even know to look over there? And I'm like, I don't know. Something just told me, don't stop here, look over here.
See, in that same vein, I don't think it's that men don't think that. I think they tend to dismiss it, where it gnaws at us. There's something there. I think women are very logical as well, but maybe we are less about streamlining the process and following that decomposition of information and more about why did it go here? Back to what Charlene said earlier.
Trusting your gut.
Asking the whys. Asking the whys.
Trusting your gut that's exactly how I describe it. Just trust it and go with it.
Yeah. Every time I don't, I always end up regretting it. There's always something that comes back. It's like, why didn't I?
That becomes a really handy tool if your spouse or your partner agrees with you that your spider sense is usually right, because every once in a while, hopefully he's not listening, you can say, no, my spider sense says, and he'll be like, oh, okay, well, I guess we shouldn't do that.
Right. It probably saves you a whole lot of money in the long run, too.
Or the other.
Yeah.
That I just spent a lot of money and I'm not going to get angry about it.
So I'm very interested. I just, obviously cybersecurity is such a fascinating area. And I'm interested in determining, both of your paths seem very almost linear when it comes to cybersecurity, but really, what was it about it that drew you to it in the first place? Whoever.
I think for me, I started looking at where is intelligence going. Military intelligence is what I worked in before, but I wanted to expand. And I knew at the agency, they were really building a big cyber program. Back then it was 2009, 2010. And I thought, okay, if they're doing that here at the agency, what's going on in the private sector? So when I started looking for a job in the private sector back home in Dallas, I just saw cybersecurity jobs everywhere. But at that point, threat intelligence was kind of just getting the ball rolling. I'm not going to say it was brand new in 2015, but it was 2010 through 2015. It was new. And I thought, man, I need to jump on this. This is where we're going for Intel. It's going to be all digital. It's going to be cyber. It's going to be hacking. So I thought, you know what? I don't consider myself good at math or science, so I was kind of doubting myself getting into the field. But I sat down with some fellow military veterans who saw my resume, and they said, if you can learn Chinese, you can learn cyber. And I was like, thank you guys for having confidence in me. And that kind of boosted me into the industry.
Yeah. I think in my side, it came from being in the technologies and going like, part of the thing, I mean, I live in the Bay Area, and part of the thing of seeing so many different technologies is that sometimes there are technologies that do things that sound cool, but I'm like, but what is it actually solving? And so it was that part of I want to work on something that makes a difference. And it's one of the things about jumping from being being an executive in a company to being a co-founder is that it's like, well, what is it really solving? And there's a few reports that come out every year, one of them being the IBM one. And, 3 years running, it's been a longer amount of time. So it's, on average, 287 days to detect and fix a breach. I'm like, that's a big problem.
A big issue.
That's a big issue. And so like, how do we make, if I can make a difference in that, that's significant. And so if I'm going to be in technology, I want to be in technology that I know is actually solving something and not
vanity. It's not vanity.
Not vanity. And I understand, make somebody's life easier. Yeah, there's a market for that. But in the end of the day, what will matter to governments and healthcare, those things matter to me.
Making a difference.
Yeah.
So what you guys both are doing is making a difference. I mean, at the end of the day. So, I mean, you.
But we're doing it in fantastic nail polish.
Well,
absolutely.
Well, her fantastic nail polish.
I kind of keep coming back to this core idea that women bring empathy. We bring these kind of softer ideals to technology and to cybersecurity, things that traditionally maybe weren't considered a positive, a benefit, but I think has enriched the areas so much. And frankly, when we don't have that level of the feminine intuition, the gut checks, the understanding and wanting to make the world a better place. I when we don't have that, I think we really are missing something.
Well, it's necessary, though. I think we forgot about it for a while. I think pre-pandemic, at least I'm noticing it here even, men and women being much more empathetic to one another, giving each other grace. You'll see somebody you haven't seen for a while, and they're like, you're surveying, can I hug them? Mask on, mask off. What's their safe space? But where I'm going with that is, I think that we forgot about humanity. And women were not, right? If we look at the progression, male-dominated workforce, so they've got their command and control structures in every business in every way, how they have departments oriented, right? Everything in a hierarchy, a really regimented hierarchy. And everything got really messy and everything got really difficult. And we tried to scale those things. And command and control works on the battlefield. It doesn't work for software. It doesn't work for cyber. It doesn't work for all the other things. I think we're at that inflection point that the pandemic, as well as the technology spinning so fast forward, kind of forced us to take a pause and say, hey, we need to be thinking about the humans. The
human element.
But
human element.
I definitely agree with that. But I don't think that being empathetic means necessarily being not being strategic and not being soft. I think that it actually comes back to everything you said about it. It just, now let's flip it, and it's all relationship. And understanding how those relationships. So one of the things we were talking about earlier was about I have an annoyance when it comes to ready for something like not to stop a sentence. I have an issue with diversity and inclusion programs because when they are all focused on let's go to the universities. And I think we should bring people in at a to be able to have people come in, but you need to be able to have a path. So what I really get annoyed about is that people give lip service to that. If I have one more person who tells me how, like, oh, we're trying to embrace having, giving more funding to females and stuff. It's not you're doing me a favor. We all know that there's better outcomes if you have a diverse executive
Diverse
team.
period.
So if you have, and that's it, but it's not just diverse. Like there's a tech company that had this leadership page that I used to do presentations and show them, and it was here's a test for all of us. It was all white men, one female. What was her role?
Chief Marketing Officer.
No, even no.
People officer.
There she was. She was because if she's not marketing, she has to be PR. And they had this leadership team, all white, and then you went to their career page, and it was like, oh, look, everyone else can be here. And it was, and they're talking about how much they support a diverse culture. I'm like, no, you don't. Look at you.
Leadership matters.
Leadership matters. And so, like, don't tell me you're doing us a favor by allowing a woman in the room when the fact is the woman in the room, because there's a different perspective, or because they may be looking at the different relationships.
Well, it's actually becoming a strategic advantage.
It is.
So I hate to put the non-human spin on it, but it's actually a strategic advantage to have diversity of thought.
But I actually think but that's my point. I mean, it is exactly that. It's a strategic advantage.
But I think that's what's driving some of the JEDI, the justice, equality, diversity initiatives. I don't think altruistically, I'd love it to be that we've all had a change of heart and we're now embracing all of this. I would lay a penny down and betcha that some of those are being driven more by a bottom line or a way to attract somebody, or that we're getting better product out.
I want it to happen anyway, and for as much as I want it to be for the of the good heart, the reality is I don't want somebody taking credit for, and because when times get tough, then those are the things that drop off.
Oh yeah, muscle memory is strong.
So let's focus on what's going to actually fine. This is what's going to move your business forward.
Yeah, I my big pet peeve is being the token woman. So the token female. So I get to moderate webinars. I get to be like the face because I'm the face, I'm the female, I'm the face of diversity and inclusion, and it's
does it mean that you're any less though? It doesn't.
No, but
it's still frustrating.
but it does send the wrong message. If that's the only reason why I'm being chosen for something, I say no, I'm not doing it. You choose for me as a person. Does that mean
I should turn down the email that I recently got that said, we're looking to make our panel more diverse and we thought of you? Really? Really? Right. Does that mean that you thought of me when you were picking the topic?
Right.
You thought of me as
who are the experts on this topic? Did you think of me, or
did you say, that looks pretty cisgendered? Might need to change that. Let's call up Trace.
That's true.
Yeah. So I hate the lip service. I hate the we're very we're all about gender equality, parity. We really we're this, and then actions speak louder than words every single day.
Yeah.
So,
but if it's as long as you tell me what your intention is, I'm going to be okay with the honesty. So if your intention is, strategically we need to do this, this is a good business practice, well, I'm at least going to give you a little bit of respect for having told me the truth about it. I saw something interesting. I can't remember if it was on LinkedIn or on Twitter, but it was a meme that said, don't tell me about your diversity program. Instead, just give me your data.
Oh yeah, I posted that.
It was wonderful though. It was give me your data.
Yeah.
Show me the salary ranges. Show me comparatively. Show me your women hires and your male hires. Show me your
length of service.
Show me all that. I just want your data.
Yeah.
Yes.
And people are pushing back on that. Companies are pushing back on that whenever they hear about it.
You know why I came to Recorded Future 2 years ago? It's because I knew I was being underpaid at my other company. And some of my colleagues were like, you should be making more than that. And I was like, thank you for letting me know. And then when I came to Recorded Future and I said, I'd like to make at least what I'm making at the other role with bonuses included. And they said, oh, that's not enough. We're going to pay you more than that. We're going to pay you what you're worth. And that blew me away. I was like, wow, they didn't have to disclose that. They did it on purpose to let me know as a woman, you're being underpaid and you're worth much more. We're going to pay you what you're worth. That was so impactful.
That's a company you want to stay with.
Absolutely. There were other options. I thought, nope, I'm going with this one because I feel valued. Yeah.
And that, in that case, this is a case where money talks and it speaks the right language. When if you've got a company that is willing to tell you you're not being paid enough, we want to, we respect and we value you, and we're willing to up the ante, even though we know we don't have to, because we know what you're making now. We could completely under.
Yeah, we can underpay.
Right. But we're not gonna. I mean, that speaks volumes.
It takes guts for a company to do that, for HR to be honest and transparent and to say, hey, males in your role make this much more, and we think that you're worth that. Oh man, that's the change we need.
That was so one of the things because I obviously went a different path than you. One of the things that I was always sensitive to was when I was starting out and this is the thing with intuition, was that I didn't take the roles that I was offered that I didn't think would help advance my career. And so there were things that were, when I was first starting out, you come out of college and they're like, oh, we call it an executive assistant, but really, no, I'm not going to take that role. And, or I had people who would be recruiters who would say like, oh, it's a director role, and I know you're saying a VP, but it doesn't matter here. It may not matter here, but it matters to the next place. Sure. And I always thought about like, I'm not going to be in this place forever, so I need to actually get a title that. I had one job early on where it wasn't an executive assistant, but it was a role that the job title wasn't right. And so when I went for the next job that actually reflected what I was doing, they're like, it's a shame that you had it listed as demand gen, and when really you were doing all this, and it was like a much bigger role. And I was like, oh, okay, I've just learned a lesson I'll never forget. And so I always I always made sure that everything I did, the title reflected what I was doing. And I may be wrong, but I always assumed that part of that was coming from the fact I was female. There was the push more of like, you should be fine with that.
Yeah.
I'm like, no,
Just accept it. It'll be okay, honey.
Yeah, but that never seemed to work with me. Amazingly, it never seemed to
Oh, that honey.
Yeah, honey.
You like that
Sweetheart.
on there?
But I think it also, to your point though, it's also degrees, right? So you could be a C-level exec at a small business, the kind of on the low end of the totem pole, or you could be maybe a step lower from a title perspective, maybe move on to into a VP role at a company that is 3 times the size.
Right.
That might not sound at first, it might not sound like a step up, but it
most definitely is a massive step up.
Yeah. So, it's sometimes that doesn't come through though. If you're just looking at a resume, you're like, oh, well, you were a CMO and now you're a VP of, sales enablement or something like that.
Most of the times I would think that I would hope the person who's hired would be able to see that part of the organization.
If they're doing their homework too, a little bit, not a lot of homework, but a little bit of homework. Google 2 of the last 3 companies. Google the last 3. Oh, that has 300,000. Oh, that has 10. Okay, well, there's
Yeah, but I think just innately, sometimes when we think about roles and titles, having a particular title, no matter what size company you're working for, it's a great thing to have. and then you move to, you're like, oh, I don't know, I was this, but now they want me to be this. And even though it's a much better and it's a better fit, it's a better job, it's a better company, do I really want it? Because maybe it looks like it's a step down. And so,
I think it has to do with, is it what you want to be doing?
Yeah.
So if I were I spoke with a candidate recently who she has a background in data scientist and as a data scientist, and she is looking at being in a different role. And so not necessarily a step backwards, but a step sideways. And I think that knowing like, oh, well, this gets me into doing X.
Yeah.
And I think that that's still, as long as it's on the path. And I think that's the important thing is as long as it's advancing what you want. It doesn't have to always be your career, but if there is a certain career you want, then make sure that what you're doing advances your career. I did a lot of hopping around technology wise in the beginning because I wanted to learn, because I'm curious most of it. I wanted to learn the latest
questions.
Yeah, I wanted to learn all the different technologies, and so it was always like, what's the cutting edge? What's the cutting edge? And so I took in the beginning lateral moves because I wanted to learn the different technologies.
Yeah.
That's a great way to approach a greater understanding and really honing in on what you really love doing. Finding finding your spot, finding your joy, basically.
I believe strongly in that. I always tell people life's too short to stay in a role that you're either unhappy in or it's not leading you to where you want to go in your career. And that means we have to map it out too.
Right.
Have an idea of the direction you're going so you can make strategic moves. It's important.
I was asked a question earlier today, and the question was, what would you tell your younger self? And it was fairly open-ended. But what I found myself, I was thinking, well, at what age? Like, which younger self am I talking about? But if I were to look over the last maybe 15 years and say, what would I tell my younger self? It would be to lower my pain threshold. Because I got a pretty high pain threshold. And there are times where I just kept fighting the good fight. And I was doing the right things because I was honestly wanted to make a difference and wanted to change something. And maybe I can fix this toxic situation. Maybe I could do that. So when I think about some of the things you're talking about, my younger self would say, oh, well, that's a little selfish to run after that. You've got something to fix first. So I like where you're going. And I like your advice to folks is don't have too high a pain tolerance.
Yeah.
Allow yourself to not be in toxic situations or in places that don't bring you joy.
Absolutely.
So where do you guys think, and this is kind of maybe an existential question, but where do you think we're headed, particularly in IT and cyber, as we do see more equity and parity and diversity for the sake of being, let me rephrase that, not because we're female, not because we fit in profile, but because we are very competent and we're very knowledgeable and we bring so much to the table. And I honestly believe that we have a lot of work to do, but there are a lot of organizations that do recognize the importance of having a diverse and equitable workforce. So where do you, Chris is giving me the look. Sorry. Go ahead.
Workforce, not leadership. That's like that is, I agree. And I will say that I think it is a testament to the women who are in that diverse workforce. It's because of the skills of people like you who you can't keep somebody like you out, not for company maturity. You couldn't keep somebody like you out because you are doing good quality product.
Mm-hmm.
That is not reflected in the leadership.
Okay.
I one of the things I mentioned before is that I'm a member of a executive group that talks to an expert group that talks to trying to do this without saying anything. So we'll go with I'm a a part of an executive group that a group of experts. I'm the only female. That was the point I was getting to. I'm the only female in cybersecurity.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm not the only expert. I'm really not.
You're not the only female in cybersecurity.
I'm not the only female who's an expert in cybersecurity.
Are there any more seats at the table where you can bring somebody else along with you? Can you reach back and bring the next gen?
Well, yes, but I just found that out. That's why I'm having this indignant.
I got it.
Because I just found that I'm like,
seriously? The only one?
Yeah, that was
exists still?
Yeah, and that type of thing is so. I think that what's disturbing to me about cybersecurity is that I think that it has more, as opposed to other types of technology, has a more diverse work base. Mm-hmm. But I still don't see it at the top.
Okay.
And I think that is personally painful for me.
Yes. But I think that's universal. I don't think it's in cybersecurity specifically. I think it's in all areas.
It is in all areas, but cybersecurity should be better.
Absolutely, and you are absolutely right. I talk to people in cybersecurity who don't fit any profile whatsoever, and they're amazing people, and they bring so much to the table. But you never hear about them in leadership positions. They hit that glass ceiling. And they've gone as far as they can go because, for whatever reason, the upper management doesn't think that they, reflect well on the company because they've got pink hair. No offense. I love your hair.
It's okay.
But
it's okay. It's keeping me out of the C-suite. I know. There's always a reason. You don't fit that profile of an executive, and I think that's wrong, and that really has to change. But I also think that it's everywhere. It's not just cybersecurity. Oh gosh, no.
No, but this is where I am right here, so that's where I'm going to be more annoyed.
I currently work for a company with many women in leadership roles at the top, executives. We call it the circle of trust. But there are so many women in those leadership roles, and I see the real life impact in the company. And even our CEO, who's a man, has set goals like, hey, we want more women in this company. How do we make this happen? Let's refer women in. So many smart, qualified women out there, refer them into these jobs. We're at 27% right now, but we're working our way up. And it's really amazing to see what kind of an impact these women in leadership have in the company. And it trickles from the top down. We feel supported, we feel seen.
You also have an ally there. Your
absolutely.
CEO is truly being an actual ally.
Yes, Christopher is a great ally. We're really, really lucky to have him in a leadership position. And maybe it's a cultural thing too, because Recorded Future was founded in Sweden, and they have a much more progressive future forward looking, worldview on gender. And just having their perspective on things is really helpful too. And sometimes they think of things that I wouldn't think of. And it's kind of like mind opening, mind altering,
It's like if you've never traveled the world, then, how can you view how can you have a worldview?
Yeah.
How can you see, the way that other people live and how they think and how they come to the conclusions
the old
that they
statement,
do.
The books you read and the people you meet, right? And that can only be accomplished by getting outside of your house, getting outside of your normal world.
Yeah. When I was growing up, I used to be one of those political science nerds that watch C-SPAN all the time because I didn't like watching my news filtered through somebody else's views and opinions. I'm like, I just want to see the Senate hearing and decide for myself. And I noticed during one of the Senate Intelligence Committee meetings, there were no women in that committee at that time when I was a teenager. And I was sitting there watching it with my dad, and I'm like, Dad, why are there no women in this committee? He said, I don't know, but you should go change that. And I'm like, well, I'm not into politics, but I'll do that in other areas. So when I got into cyber, I recognized that all of the people on stage speaking at conferences were men. And I'm like, why are there no women on stage? And, Dad's voice came in my head. If you don't like it, go change it. And that's what I've been sharing with women all over the world is if you recognize a gap and you want to create more equality, set the standard. Go jump up there, learn how to do public speaking, learn how to code, like bring your perspective into it, fill that gap.
That's great. It's interesting because a lot of times still, it took me a long time for me to actually kind of see the world a lot more unfiltered. I still, have times when I'm looking at a panel or I'm watching something that is male dominated. It doesn't even occur to me that it really shouldn't be that way, just because I'm so
it's ingrained. You were exposed to that, desensitized to it.
No, go right ahead.
Oh, I was going to say there's a panel that I did at it was AI related, and I started off by the guy who was doing the facilitator was great, and he'd interviewed us ahead of time, so he'd asked somebody a question, and then afterwards like, Kristen, what do you think? And I said, oh, thank you for asking. I thoroughly disagree, and I gave my thing, and I ended up being the voice of a business view, and somebody said to me afterwards, like, and you were the only woman on there, and I was like, oh, I was the only woman. Like, it didn't occur to me, And in fact, honestly, I got hung up on the fact that I was the only one who didn't have a technical background. So I was like, I was throwing out my strength. My strength was like, well, let's look at it through my lens. And it didn't even occur to me. I'm like, oh, I was the only woman, I don't know. That just happens so often. I don't even think of it.
Yeah. I don't know what we need to do to change that beyond just getting us up there and doing it. And frankly, again, it shouldn't be we need more women on a panel because it's all white males or whatever. It really should just be, I want you on my panel because you have a particular strength that you bring to the...
What I have started doing is when I'm asked to be on a panel and I ask if they have other openings, and I'm like, oh, have you thought about... And they happen to be other women.
Yeah. Networking and making the connections, and again, lifting each other up.
Quiet way to do it too. It isn't as like sometimes folks can be affronted, like, oh, you don't have enough diversity on this panel. Well, then they're gonna kind of put their hand up a little bit and like, but that's okay. Do you want to be on the panel or not? But your approach is, are there any other open seats? Because I really have an expert, I think, that would really benefit this conversation. Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So we're running out of time. I think we only have about 5 minutes left. So I kind of want to open it up to you guys. Tracy, do you have any particular questions or anything that you want to... how's the show been for you? Because you've been running around
running around
maniac.
Crazy. We have a book that was published, Reinventing Cybersecurity, and it is all women and non-binaries. And so we had book signings for that and some live streaming about it. So that's been exciting. But this is my first RSA. So I've been so many other conferences for the last couple of decades. But this is my first, and it has a different feel to it. And I've been in conferences where there've been cyber before, but it has a little bit of a different feel to it this time. But I noticed on the agendas, there are tracks around human element, around not using jargon, around diversity. Was it always that way? Have you guys been at RSA before? Is it something that's always been there?
Well, I will say that the leadership at RSA is very female focused. And so, again, really reflected in the agenda.
Absolutely.
We're not talking about, ways to detect ransomware. We are talking about that, but it's also, exactly, there's a real kind of emphasis on the softer skills, if you will, or the softer subjects of cybersecurity.
Or maybe we could say well-rounded.
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. But it really does reflect, and but it wasn't always that.
One thing I noticed this time as opposed to a couple of years ago is that there are more female speakers and there's more female sales engineers in the expo hall.
Interesting.
So when you walk up to get a demo, it used to be majority male, and now I've got my friend Larcy's out there as a sales engineer now, and all these females doing these very technical demonstrations.
The expo and look for that.
Yeah.
Because as they were getting set up last night, they opened at 5:00. I did like a spin through about quarter of, and it still felt as though there was a woman organizer.
Yeah.
And the troop of fellows around
Absolutely.
them. So, but that might have been me seeing it that way with my own bias. So.
That's true. That's true.
So how about you? How about your experience at RSA this year?
I used to send people to RSA and only came once before, as far as like actually being here. So I will say I've done the drive-by downstairs, and it actually did seem more similar still. I think I have a different lens on it though right now. I think where I'm seeing it's interesting. I understand about like the organizer. Where I'm seeing I haven't seen the female SEs. What I have seen is the data scientists, because as people are bringing data scientists to events, the very large portion that is female and the data scientists, it goosebumps, like
Yes,
you know, like
absolutely.
And I think that this is the whole thing of us talking about like what's pushing so much female forward is that's part of the thing of like good data scientists, like could be male, could be female, and there's a lot of really good female data scientists.
Absolutely.
And so that's what I saw a bit on the floor that I hadn't seen in other shows.
That's great. That's great. Charity, what about you?
Oh man, I'm having so much fun.
Yeah.
I love this. I'm an extrovert, so I thrive on this social time. And this time it just feels electric because everyone's so excited to be back together again. It's like a reunion in the threat intelligence community. We've all been doing virtual presentations for so long, and you see people, but when you see them in person, there's just something about, hey, give me a hug. It's been so long. So I love the atmosphere right now. Lots of great threat intelligence presentations we've been sitting in on. And one thing that I've noticed is different is that public-private partnership. We've got people here from NSA, FBI, CISA, government and intelligence agencies around the world speaking about the importance of these partnerships. And I love that because in the past it was kind of hit or miss. Some of them were a little hesitant to come out and get involved, but it's just
an imperative now in a different way. We can't sit idly. We can't just say, government, go figure this out, or industry, you can go have your smart stuff going on over here and make a gob of money.
Yeah.
There has to be that public-private partnership if we're going to survive now.
I love it.
It's the only way we're going to be able to move it forward. So
yes,
I want to thank all of you for joining us today.
Thank you,
Charity, Chris, and Tracy. As always,
so nice,
thank you, darling.
So awesome. So, and I do. I hope we can continue the conversation even well beyond today's episode. So, thank you both again for joining us today.
Thanks,
It's been a real pleasure having the conversation. All right, everybody. I think we have one more interview left, and then we're going to close out day one of Techstrong TV live at RSAC here in San Francisco. So please do stay tuned. We'll be right back.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond, CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everybody, happy Tuesday and welcome to Techstrong TV Live at RSA. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon and I am just thrilled beyond belief to be here in San Francisco to be having the conversations that we're going to be having today with all folks in the IT sector. The energy here is low right now because we're just getting started, but I have a feeling by the end of the day we are all going to be buzzing. We've got a lot of great interviews on tap today and tomorrow and Thursday, so I certainly hope you can stick around for the entirety. We'll also be showing them on demand later on Techstrong TV. But for now, my first interview of the day is with Mr. Jeff Hudson, who is the CEO of Venafi. Jeff, thank you so much for joining me today. I do appreciate it. It's great to see you.
Charlene, it's great seeing you. And you said there's low energy today. There was walking in here, and then I sat down and you started talking. I go, whoa, where'd all this energy come from first thing in the day?
There we go. That's 2 cups of tea. and a scone. So that's what you get, I guess.
It's a book, isn't it?
That's right. That's right. Well, listen, you guys are one of our sponsors over at the DevSecOps Days event. So tell me, actually, for those people who don't know Venafi, please tell us a little bit about your company and what you guys do.
Sure. So let me give you a little context. So there's two actors on a network, people and machines. And people identify themselves to machines using usernames and passwords and some biometrics. But then machines have to talk to one another to make all these transactions and great systems work. They got to talk to one each other, identify to one another. They don't use usernames and passwords, they use machine identities. And we spend about $10 billion a year managing human identities. We're just getting started managing machine identities. The number of machines is going through the roof. That's what DevSecOps is all about. Machines are software. Bad guys steal identities and use them in attacks. And so you know who Okta is, right? So think of us as Okta for machine identity.
Okay.
And we created this category called machine identity management. And you know what's really cool? Seriously, we created a category, and that doesn't happen very often.
That's pretty awesome. That's like a whole Wikipedia
in and
of itself.
It is. And so 6 years ago, I met with Gartner, and I said, well, you know, all of our customers are talking about machine identities and machine identity management, and they laughed. And then I went down to the show floor yesterday at RSA and at DevOpsCon. There's like 10 or 12 different companies that are saying machine identities. And so we actually really created the category because it's really, really important. People and machines are the two actors. And we have a vision of the world where humans and machines work together to make the human condition better. So we better trust those machines, and it starts with their identity.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. And I've actually had conversations with a number of folks lately about machine identity management. And so obviously you hit something early on, and that's a really, really strong thing to think about, because especially with everything happening over the last 2 or 3 years with the pandemic, you know, we've had a lot of cybersecurity incidents that have cropped up a lot because we haven't had a real kind of handle on machine identity. And to your point earlier, you know, cyber threat actors, they're breaking into the network and they're assuming the identities and they're wreaking havoc. So where do you kind of see the space moving forward? I mean, obviously popularity, it's going to become even more popular, but where do you see, you know, the majority of kind of movement in the space?
So, little factoid, 11 years ago, I joined the company. We were 17 people. We were like 5 customers, and we're doing a tiny amount of revenue. Fast forward today, we've got 600 customers, the world's biggest, most security conscious, digitally transformed customers in the world, 500 people worldwide, 3,200 customers that use our open source project that we'll talk about. And it's been really fun to watch things grow and go and change. But all digital transformation happened in the data center.
Yeah.
Remember? Do you remember? Do you remember servers? Do you remember what a server was?
I remember servers.
Do you remember
yes.
Linux?
Oh, yes.
And do you remember the monolithic apps that were built on those?
Yes.
That was all digital transformation up until about 5 years ago. And then this thing called the cloud shows up as a platform. And now what's happened is digital transformation is happening at cloud native speeds.
Right.
So all digital transformation now, all the new apps is happening in a modern way on the cloud. And it's really fascinating to watch it because software is eating the world. We used to laugh, right? Remember when Andreessen said that?
Yeah.
And I used to tease him about that a little bit, but it was software was eating the world. But now that was about 1,000 miles an hour. Now it's going at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And so that's a big change. So we kind of created this category in the data center, you know, server, Linux, et cetera. And we are now leading, we lead there, and now we're leading also in cloud native, which is different. It's Kubernetes. It's there. You can't find a server in the cloud. I mean, seriously, right? It starts with Kubernetes and then Istio and some of the things that do the cross cloud management.
Right.
And that's brand new. And so this is exciting. So this is where it's all going. And this is what we can talk about a little bit as we passed a milestone yesterday.
Yeah. So, you know, let's kind of double back just a second. Do you see the cloud native space actually being kind of usurping, that traditional digital transformation, like to the point where it's completely obliterating the kind of the standard digital transformation? Are we past that point, or are we still going to be doing, or is it going to be kind of?
It's all layers.
Okay. All right.
Seriously, the mainframe is still actually there. And a lot of the very large corporations is still there. And we build wrappers, we put layers on it. And if anybody tells me we're going to lift and shift and we're going to get rid of that, there's no business case to do it.
Right. Right.
So what you do is you wrap it, you leave it there, and then the new things, they make calls as they need to. But you're not going to go recreate some of the stuff that took years to recreate and get right.
And why would you?
They're right. There's no business value.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, let's talk about this this open source project that you guys have.
Right.
Tell me, what's the name of it?
It's called Cert Manager.
Okay.
And we're about 2 million downloads a day now.
That's
Last
amazing.
year we got 500 million downloads in 2021, which was amazing in and of itself.
Right.
And if we think about machines, software, machine identities, TLS certificates, SSH keys, API keys. So we're going down a few levels. Those identity types.
Yep.
The one that gets used the most in Kubernetes clusters, and then some of the management capabilities are TLS certificates for getting into, getting out of, and moving across Kubernetes clusters.
Okay.
Cert Manager, we created Cert Manager to solve all the problems related to these kinds of machine identity types, TLS. Because you got to get them, you got to keep them current, you got to know where they are. Because if they fail, big systems go down. Like 2 weeks ago in Germany, almost all the payment systems in Germany went down because a TLS certificate expired. And people couldn't buy groceries, they couldn't get gas. I mean, these are systems that we count on.
Yeah.
That these things are important. So we created the open source piece that everybody can download and is downloading and putting into the Kubernetes world. And that's our contribution to get developers to take care of a lot of stuff that they'd have to code themselves otherwise. And then what we do is we come in and hook it up to something that gives the organization visibility, consistency, and control, which you need for high levels of security and high levels of reliability.
And it seems like a technology that is it's necessary today in this today's cloud native world.
You need it.
Yeah, exactly.
Identity in machines does two things. It gives ability to authenticate and then to authorize. If you're a machine and I'm a machine, wouldn't that be fun? So, no. So
I don't know.
Right? Yeah, it'd be weird.
Yeah.
But there's a way we communicate, and you're going to. First of all, going to want to authenticate me. I recognize that. And I will then authorize this machine to access you or access data. And it turns out in identity is different. And most people say, well, it's just like any resource, but it's not, because it gives access. And so you need to have a life cycle. You need to authenticate. You need to use it for authorization, and then you have to have governance. So these are all very specific things you have to do around machine identity. So I'm always going to always authenticate you, so I know who you are before I give you access or authorize you to access. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I wonder how are the bad guys actually using TLS certificates to kind of break into systems, because it seems like that would be a point for them to be able to do so if they were.
Happens all the time. It's called the man in the middle attack. And so many times the world has been, let me ask you, have you ever gotten a message that said the certificate on this site is expired?
Yes.
Okay, of course you have. And you can click two buttons. One says, get more information. The other one says proceed anyway.
Yeah. I always get more information. I never proceed.
And then you proceed anyway?
No, actually, normally I don't. Yeah. Thank you. Yay, I've done something right. It's not even 9 o'clock yet.
You're unique. Most security professionals, when I ask in a big audience, raise your hand if you've ever clicked proceed anyway. Click. And one of the reasons is they're in a hurry.
Right, yeah.
So we're trained to say we get a message, and it's a warning message, says this may be an insecure site, proceed anyway. And so the bad guys count on that kind of behavior. So that's one, humans, right? The other one is machine to machine. If I can get a certificate and I can use it, it's a machine identity, and I can use it to access other machines. A beautiful example everybody remembers, and this really kicked off the success of our companies, was Stuxnet.
Oh,
Remember
yes, Stuxnet. Yeah.
Well, it used a code signing certificate, a machine identity type that it stole to get software to run in a place where it shouldn't have been running. And it happened to be the Iran nuclear processing facility, right? And then it escaped into the wild, but it had this trusted identity on it, so wherever it would land, it would run. And so companies, organizations have to be able to keep track of that stuff, make sure they don't get used.
Yeah.
And so then there's a lot of other attacks, but it's like somebody gets a certificate, somebody gets an SSH key, somebody gets an API key, and all bets are off because you can't tell, are they good or are they bad?
Yeah, it's one of those areas, I think, that when we're talking about machine identities and machines talking to machines, sometimes I feel like we really do still need to have the humans involved, because we're kind of vetting, if you will, because sometimes the machines don't actually recognize if something is off, if that makes sense.
No, it totally makes sense. So humans have a role here. Humans and machines have to work together to improve the human condition. And there are so many times when machines work autonomously. So we'll kick something off and then we won't come back for 6 months, but those machines will be working away together and doing a lot of stuff. And so you can't just say everything that a machine does, there's a human behind it. That's a fallacy. And machines are becoming smarter and smarter, right? Stipulate that. They're becoming more and more autonomous. We will give them agendas and say, go find this stuff and then do this. And then we'll actually allow it to say, and if you find this, do that. If you find this and this and this, do that. And then it's autonomy. It's they look at a situation, they make an agenda, and then they act on it. Yes, always a human at some point back in the day pushed a button. But then after that, these things work on their own. Ransomware, for example, humans aren't involved with ransomware. Ransomware attacks happen where machines are doing the work. And one of the reasons, humans are noisy. When you go and get into a network, there's all kinds of things that go on. But machines, thousands of machines, millions of machines, it's just machine noise. It's noise.
Yeah. Well, I get the feeling we could talk about this all day long, because it really is a fascinating conversation, and there are so many nuances, especially with respect to machines and autonomy. We got a long day ahead of us.
I know we do. We do. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for your service.
Wow.
Because you bring to the world information that's necessary for us to participate in the evolution of what's happening here.
Wow.
And do it mindfully, do it consciously, for God's sake. We just can't say, oh, technology will figure it out, or, oh, we don't have to think about that. We have to think about it. The ethics of AI, the ethics of ML.
Absolutely.
What are machines? What is our relationship to machines? And people are going to laugh at me just like Gartner laughed at me 6 years ago. But this is from our perch, we see it clearly. We all have to be aware of this.
Well, you're very kind to say that, but I do believe it's a very, very important topic. And as we become more comfortable with machines actually running things and becoming more autonomous, I think we need to take a closer eye and really stay on top of it.
To fly our planes, drive our cars.
Yeah.
Decide on our credit, all that autonomously.
Yeah. So, Jeff, thank you so much for spending a few minutes with me this morning to have the conversation. It's great to see you.
Thank you. It's great to see you.
All right.
Thank you very much.
All right, everybody, we've got another interview coming up in a couple minutes, so please stay tuned. But for now, we're going to take a quick break.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more.
This is Techstrong TV.
Well, today I have the great pleasure of being joined by Tom Barton. Tom is head of data at Contino. Welcome, Tom. Good to be talking with you.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
I'm an old data guy from a long way ago, so this is a great topic. I love talking about data, so we definitely want to get to that, but please introduce yourself, tell folks about you and a little bit about Contino.
Sure. Well, I'm Tom Barton, head of the data practice for Contino, and what that means is that I'm responsible for data engineering across all three clouds, artificial intelligence, machine learning, data strategy, and everything in between. And that's because Contino is, a digital consultancy that really helps you transform the way you do business. Part of that, part and parcel of that is data. And really, I could not do what I do in terms of data modernization and monetization without the compatriots that I have that do cloud modernization, uplift, site reliability engineering, really modern practices to help you engineer the best experience for your business and company. And of course, data goes along with that. So if I don't have a secure space, a cloud landing zone, a really well architected, cloud place for me to put the data, then I fail as part of my practice. Of course, my practice has some of those skills as well. But really, we focus on, as I mentioned, the kind of engineering and outcome-based, approaches to your data.
I was having a conversation with our new GM of our research business. We were talking about how things are so connected between microservices and cloud native and data and DevOps and rapid delivery of software and AI and how that all fits into it. No one thing is what it is about. It's about all of it, how you leverage it together, right?
It really is. It's an interconnected world. I mean, it's a more complex world. If you think about it, years ago, we used to talk about the full stack, like a full stack developer. I think we're so far beyond that now. And there's really no one person that can know every nuance of the stack really, really well. And that's why we focus on a couple of areas. And even within data, as I focus on it, I find myself, talking to customers about, the appropriate place to put their information and the choices that they have in terms of storage with regard to speed, accessibility, again, monetization, what's the business outcome you want with your data? And that directs the solution that we give them. And there's just so many, if you just think about the three major cloud providers alone, they have a plethora of things to pick from. So if you're a company, faced with making that decision around where your data is and what you do with it for the business outcome, how do you arrive at a choice? And that's really where I find myself, in most of the customer journey these days, helping them navigate that space. In addition to talking about the general strategy for how they use their data.
We're in such a telemetry data, sensor data, financial transaction, customer experience data, data about what's happening in our applications and observability. We're not lacking for data, that's for sure, right? I mean, right. We're kind of overrun with data. Maybe that's part of the challenge is where do you start when you're kind of, you're sitting on all this information? How do you decide what to tackle first?
It's tough. I mean, you mentioned the amount of data. There's one customer that we have that has 1 billion IoT transactions a day. Can you mention that every day? And there are other customers just have data coming in and they don't know what to do with it. So where do you start is often a question we get asked. And what we focus on first is, business priorities. I mean, that's the thing these days is that we're, talking about a technical solution is kind of obvious, but the thing that we hear people pounding on the desk today about is, I need to use this data for something. And that is almost always the place to start. So what's the outcome you're after and where do we start for you? That's the micro view of the macro problem that you just talked about with like all the data that you have, but you almost can't approach it like all data at the same time, right? Most modern business today, unless you're, a small to mid-sized market, you have, and even some of the mid-market companies have multiple divisions, multiple offerings, multiple product capabilities and services, multiple customer segments. So now you have all this data segmented, probably siloed, and saying where do you start with all of it is going to be daunting. And so what we try to do is bring it back to the logical approach of what's the business outcome you want. Let's prioritize those outcomes first. Then there's underlying data, services, and capabilities that we can go after to help you with that outcome. that's the best place to start. And then productize it. And it sounds a little funny when we talk about it, but productizing the data, making someone responsible for that solution will eventually help you monetize it and give you a pattern for approaching the rest of the data. And so that's kind of the place that we're in now, talking to customers about, the approach, the initial approach to data.
Sounds like an evolution of, we used to talk about the data owner, right? Who's the owner? Now it's like sort of like APIs, productizing data, right?
Yeah, you have to. And you bring up a really good point in terms of data ownership. Someone is always responsible for that data in terms of its dispensation, how you share it, et cetera. But now the reason we talk about it as a product is because more than one constituent, whether it's a customer or an internal constituent or your colleagues, et cetera, or third party, needs access to that data for some purpose more than ever before. So in the interconnected world you mentioned, a product set or a digital experience is governed by multiple data points, not just one. And so you want to mix them and match them and build something to its best efficacy. To do that, how do you get at the data? How do you share it? So there has to be a product owner, a data owner, and you have to offer it like a product, explain it like a product. And I would say the other thing we're seeing is a more consumer-driven approach to data consumption. And if I could leave you with one thing out of a lot of this conversation, it would be how people are consuming the data and utilizing it, both your customers and your employees. And that's an important thing to think about. How are your employees using the data to further your business? That's going to be one of your biggest challenges. Because, if you looked at the education marketplace, right, and who's coming in as an employee, and it's difficult to hire, right? You will have people with quantitative finance degrees. That's a real degree, by the way. And, and you'll have a woman on your staff who knows Python in addition to all her financial data skills. And now she's saying, hey, I'd really like access to the data because I'm not in Excel anymore. I'm writing a Python script to do what I need to do with the data, or to prototype it, or to visualize it in some way.
Yeah,
how do you give her access
or something to visualize it? Yeah.
How does she find it? How does she access it? One of the hardest problems is consumption.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting too, because I also put partners in that as kind of a third part of that, and it seems like one of the drivers, when you put a strategy together around data, it isn't just like, let's throw it in a data lake and put some, Tableau or some tool on it and then let people go farm it, right? And like kind of go after it. That's, inviting chaos, I think.
Yeah.
But there's oftentimes a sense in the business of, we're sitting on a lot of X, a lot of data about customers, a lot of data about our history of manufacturing or whatever it is, the business that you're in. It seems like there's always this pent up demand of, I wish we could leverage that in some way. And of course, you could flip that, add to the end of it, to benefit our business in this way, to improve the customer experience or get new customers, or whatever the drivers are. Is that a pretty common experience for you as well?
It's a much more common experience these days. And I think, using it for the benefit of the business, we could talk about that a lot of ways. I've heard it talked about in terms of value. What's the value of the data to the business in terms of product creation? I've also heard it talked about in terms of monetizing data. Not as much, because that the connotation with monetize somewhere, it's a bit pejorative. People think, you mean sell the data?
Yeah, like selling my personal information. No, it's not what we're talking about, right?
Right. But we've had customers say before, this is a real customer use case, say, we think we're only monetizing 25% of our data, meaning, we know there's inherent value in there, but of what we're able to access and create in terms of new products and customer experiences, we think we're just, a quarter of it is actually providing real value to us. Mm-hmm. And that monetization comment is within the last year, so much, much more prevalent, much more so than the other M word, which is modernization. Mm-hmm. And, we've heard that too. So helping customers monetize their data, get access and bring the value out, in one way, shape, or form, whether that's creating a new product, new service, customer experience, or selling it, right? There may be some legitimate uses for the sale of data, but mostly it's, the former.
The
I totally get, because you could interpret monetization the wrong way. The mental model that works for me is it's like capital and working capital, right? You have money sitting in the bank and you have working capital that's helping you. You're getting value from it. It's putting it to work in ways that's helping your customers, your business, all of that. It's kind of what you're talking about with monetization.
Yeah. It's the difference between, if you think about it, doing something to the data and doing something with the data. Like you can store the data, you can move it around. That's doing something with the data. You can even modernize it and, shift it somewhere. But if you're not doing anything with it, right, actually taking action on it, that's the key point driver in monetization. And it's, again, modernization is not a bad word, right? I like data modernization. But if you're think of it this way, if you are modernizing your application stack only so you can get better access to the data, then that tells me a story that you need to modernize your data stack, or think about monetization of your data stack, or shift it in a different way so that you can access that better. Maybe leave your application alone, maybe focus on the data itself.
I'm curious your perspective about sort of the temporal nature, the time nature of data, because no news to you or any of us, right? We're living in a world where things change faster and faster, not just technology, but code that we deploy, product, and we're going to experiment with this new service or add something to an offering and do it in this region of whatever part of the globe that we're doing business in our cloud. And in the monitoring world, we have observability now, and we talk about, the temporal nature of data, because things go away, they disappear, things change, the codes change from the time we saw whatever event occur. That kind of happens with data too. Is that one of the challenges you're starting to see more customers struggle with?
It is definitely something they're struggling with, and in a multivariate set of ways, right? So they are, yes, the data itself changes and morphs over time, as you pointed out, just like anything else. The underlying technology, the storage medium of it, changes and morphs over time. So you're dealing with several levels of change on data. And, you could lose access to data because of that change, right? We all know, at least some of us who've been around for a little while, know data stored on tape, may not be accessible anymore in the same way. So we need to move it or modernize it or access it. The data format may no longer be supported. Or common, I would say, right? There's still a lot of support out there, but might not be common and maybe difficult to convert or get at. And then it may not be described in a really great way. So that makes it even more difficult to get at it. And then I talked about the technology difference a little while ago about what's your choice of data solution that you want today. Pick it, and every cloud provider has it in multiple versions of it, and it's dizzying. And then I think there's the other part of the data changing and over time, which is it is ephemeral in some cases, and it should be ephemeral. And then there's the governance part of data that we don't often talk about, but we do in regulated industries a lot, right? Which is you have to keep data for a certain amount of time, like a minimum of 7 years, if it's certain personal financial data within a company, or things like know your customer. You have to keep it around, for regulatory purposes, or you can't transport it. If it's in the EU, it can't be moved to a US-based data storage medium. Those are things we know about. And then how do you expire the data? To some cases, you want to get rid of the data, right? So you do want it to change and morph or just be deleted over time. Mm-hmm. So the question we're being asked now, in terms of your really good question about the change in nature of data, is how do we apply policy change to data? So we know data changes and we have policies for it. Great. What is a way that we can apply those written policies in an automated way to data so that we're not caught flat-footed in terms of its formatting, its dispensation, its, or its status in terms of deletion?
Yeah, interesting. I'm curious too, you talked about treating data as a product. I imagine there's sort of a life cycle of people go to really thinking about it more strategically about data as they go through monetization, kind of processes. Are there a typical set of evolutionary steps that people take? And maybe do you have any, without naming customers, but do you have any kind of real world stories or might be relatable for folks?
There is, and we've dealt with it quite recently. Actually, a couple of customers who have gone through the process of looking for new capabilities or services to use their data with. And it was a real pressing need to the point where one of the customers was in a modernization kind of project, and they stopped it because the outcome from modernization would have been too long for their potential use case for the data, which is, hey, we think we could use the data for customers to exchange information or product with each other. And that represents, a multi-million-dollar kind of opportunity for us if we could get it done now. So how do we do that, right? How do we approach that? And what are the steps that we take to approach it? And the good news is that there was half the battle was already done, was knowing what they want to do with the data. Rule number one, right? Always have an outcome and a desired outcome for it, not just modernization for its own sake without some sort of outcome focus is almost always doomed to failure, like half the time, I think. So that was great. You've identified a potential outcome. We work with you on the strategy to help you get it there. Now you have to find the data, right? So finding it, knowing where it's at is one thing. Accessing it is another. And then defining it in terms of its utilization and usage. And then moving on to actual action where we're making it, work for you over time at a product level. So those are some of the steps that we recommend. And we've taken with clients to actually action the data. And today, one of those products is in capability at the moment where clients are moving data with each other. They are trading in kind of a marketplace. And that value conversation and that data journey, was groundbreaking for the client. And now if you repeat it enough times, right, if you think about that one microcosm of how you use one set of data, repeat it with others, right? So make this an iterative approach. You'll then build a value chain of data that will eventually have you modernize your entire data stack and kind of strangle away the old pattern and then give you a new capability.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I bet a lot of folks can relate to that.
Yeah,
definitely. I definitely can. I'm curious, a big part of our audience is DevOps, people doing building software using those types of techniques and processes. How do you view data now and how that fits into a DevOps world, an agile DevOps kind of environment?
Yeah, we're behind. Data is behind. We have to admit that. And we've sort of seen it come in the last 5 years. You're in the conversation about data ops, data ops, data operations, ML ops, and AI ops. If I could say that those are probably the big buzzwords in the last couple of years with data, right? It's still a nascent kind of capability, but it has to occur because we hamper DevOps processes, by not keeping up with their dynamic ability to, move product and releases in the sprints that they do, reliably produce a set of results or capabilities dynamically. That's not being done with data. And point in fact, this is another customer example where they were looking for the ability to spin up data in a DevOps sort of way, a data ops sort of way. Hey, can you help me get data so I can build applications? I need test data, good test data management principles and data ops principles to build data capabilities and subsets so that I could iterate and build these new products and services that I'm trying to get to market that are already agile and DevOps enabled, right? They're already moving through a DevOps pipeline really well. And so we were holding them up at this particular client by saying, can you hang on a second? I do data refreshes every quarter. So I'm going to I'll put it, someone will spin it up for you and put it in another data storage layer. What do you mean? A quarter? I'm on a 2-week sprint. I cannot wait for you. You're holding my release cycle up. That's a nightmare. That's a nightmare for DevOps professionals everywhere. And I can guarantee you, if we had one of my DevOps partners on with us, he or she would say the same thing, right? It is a pernicious strain on DevOps developers if they are including data as part of their cycle.
Yeah, it's one of those, do they include it? Do they just go off and do their own? Do they get it? Sometimes they can get it somewhere else.
And they do most times they do their own, which,
exactly.
Then my nightmare then leads to data sprawl, data replication, non-reliable copies of data. The whole nightmare of a data governance, professional's career is ensconced in what, independent DevOps developers can do when they go off on their own and spin up copies of data.
And just integrity. What data is the source of truth right now? What, because my numbers, your numbers don't work.
Right. Worst case scenario. it's worst case scenario where then they show those numbers to the business and they go, where'd you get those numbers? Like, is that true? And now the original data owner has to answer a whole new set of questions. Not a fun place to be.
They have lots of true up conversation.
Yeah.
Not fun. Well, great. It's been fantastic talking with you. And, parting thought is maybe we need a Phoenix Project book for data, the Data Phoenix Project.
I think we do. I could talk about this all day long. I think this is a phenomenal conversation, but we do. We kind of need a Project Phoenix book for data. I think we could co-author that, right?
I think we've got the first chapter written here, don't we?
Exactly.
We'll do a transcribe. We'll put it out there, see if we can download it, and then we'll write the rest of it together, Tom. All right. It's been fantastic talking with you. Where can folks find out more about Contino and the things that you do, maybe some resources that you have?
Absolutely. They can find us at contino.io, and that has a bunch of resources, including the latest white papers, capabilities, and opinions we have about great data solutions.
Mm-hmm. And how do they most often engage you? Is it a consultative type of conversation, or?
It is. It's typically a consultative type of conversation. And look, these kind of conversations we're having, I am happy to have with clients or prospective clients. We too often it's very transactive in this world, and just this conversations like this alone can help guide you and instruct you. And then typically, if it goes deeper than this, we do advisory work where we help them really figure out a strategy all the way to execution. And that's the main point, is that you talking about the data and building the data strategy is one thing, but then executing and prioritizing it, like you had mentioned, like what do you focus on? That's the thing we're really good at, which is helping you focus on those outcomes one at a time. What does the saying go? Eat the elephant. How do you eat the elephant? A forkful at a time, right?
Yeah. And with a stick, right? Poking the elephant, right? All right, Tom. Great talking with you, Tom Barton, who is head of data, the data practice at Contino. Thanks again for joining us. Hope you come back. We have some more to talk about. We got another chapter to write.
Absolutely. Would love to. Thank you.
Take care, Tom.
All right. Bye.
Looking for a live conference focused on the tools, technologies, and practices most important to your business? Innotech conferences are live one-day business and technology conferences highlighting the latest in trends for IT leaders, developers, and IT professionals. Each event combines education, innovation, peer-to-peer networking, and the latest technology and business solutions for a diverse IT-focused audience. Innotech conferences occur throughout the year in strategic regional locations, bringing together technology professionals from various industries to learn about the solutions, practices, and tools impacting their day-to-day work and gain insight into what's to come. Presenters at Innotech conferences are selected and curated to ensure each session provides the most up-to-date and relevant information without any hype. Whether you're interested in digital transformation, cybersecurity, cloud, IT leadership, or DevOps, Innotech conferences deliver. 2022 events are scheduled to be held in Austin, Dallas, Oklahoma City, Houston, and Washington, D.C. Innotech conferences are produced by Techstrong Live and powered by Techstrong Group.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Raj Datta, who's CEO for Oak9. They just raised $8 million to help address all our security as code issues. Raj, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate you having me on.
We've been talking about security as code and shift left and a lot of the issues that emerged with infrastructure as code for a while. Why haven't we solved this problem yet? And what makes your approach different?
Yeah, I mean, that's really what Oak9 is focused in on. And just a little bit of background of what Oak9 does is we're a cloud native security platform. And essentially, what we do is we really hone in on focus in on securing infrastructure as code. And so, just for the audience members, Mike, I'm sure you're familiar with infrastructure as code, but just from a very high level, the easiest way I like to describe infrastructure as code is, if you go back about 10 years or so and, if developers wanted to create an application, they'd have to put it in order. They'd have to get a server stood up. They'd have to get networking. They'd have to get storage, et cetera. If you fast forward to today, what's happened is all of that has been codified. So that's allowed developers to crank out infrastructure as code at lightning speed. You know, the likes of HashiCorp's Terraform, for example, has been widely adopted. It's about a $12 billion market out there for them. And what we've seen is the rise of, you know, the developers having the ability to deploy infrastructure as code at lightning speed. Now, what's happened is, you know, and everyone's aware of this, is there's a massive shortage of security engineers. I was just reading last night, but there's about 38% unfilled security engineering roles that are out there. And, you know, security teams are unable to keep up with the speed of infrastructure as code. And that's really where Oak9 comes in. And really our focus has been to help organizations really, instead of, you know, the buzzword out there is shift left, but we believe in starting left. So if you really, you know, bake in your security posture at the very beginning of your development process, throughout the CI/CD pipeline, we're able to keep it secure throughout the process. And then once you go and deploy the product, you're already secure by that point. And so that's what makes, you know, Oak9 very, very different than, you know, many of the companies that are out there today.
It seems like there's a bit of a debate about shifting left versus leaning left. And shifting left is like, we're going to ask developers to take care of all this stuff, and you know, they may or may not have the time or the skills, and it will be uneven. Versus leaning left is we embed things into the CI/CD pipeline and DevOps pipeline, and we automate a lot of that stuff on behalf of developers. So, which, you know, how far left are we going to go, do you think?
Well, you know, Oak9 starts at the very beginning, right? So we truly are starting left. So as you're designing the IAC, you know, whichever language you're using, and then checking in the code, that's when Oak9 gets activated. And our product, we've kept it very, very simple because we do, you know, we're aware that developers don't want to be security professionals, and that's not what they signed up for. But what we do is we ask, you know, 4 or 5 simple questions with regards to the application. What type of compliance needs it'll have? Where is the data going to be focused? Is it going external? Is it internal? Very, very simple questions. And once we do that, what ends up happening is, you know, our engine kicks off, and the developers can go into their own workflow, continue to develop in the platform that they see that they use today. And what we're doing is we're working in the background. And so very few times will the developers actually come into our platform. It's also, you know, a lot, what we also allow is security professionals to actually tailor the security guardrails that are required within our platform, and then it's off to the races. So it's automated in the background, so people aren't thinking that they have to go in, check in at Oak9 every single time. The very first time after you check it in the design phase, the engine is running in the background.
What will be the role of security professionals in this brave new shift left world? Because, you know, we've had a divide between developers and security folks forever and a day. Is that going to get any better as a result of all this?
I mean, I see the divide every day. My 2 other co-founders, one's a developer by nature and one's security by nature. So I see the divide on a regular basis. But that's, you know, that's really why we built this product the way we did. Is you know, we're allowing security engineers, because we know, like, throughout the development process, security needs are going to change. And what we allow security professionals to do is actually update that with what we call our security as code blueprints. So you can make live updates to the development workflow without disrupting what the developer is doing.
Do you think as we go along here that one of the issues that we're dealing with is we have enabled developers in the name of productivity to use these tools to provision and configure infrastructure, mainly in the cloud. But by and large, there's just a raft of misconfiguration. So, you know, have we reached a point where this is going to become a crisis?
You know, there are some companies that are rapidly deploying IAC and really checking a very small percentage of that. And what's going to happen is, you know, the technical debt keeps building up and building up. And that's where, you know, we feel very strongly that if we're able to catch the security drift prior to deployment, that's where, you know, I was reading as a stat that IBM had produced is like it's 100x more expensive to catch that security drift post-deployment versus if you do it during the development process. And so, you know, by integrating into a product like Oak9, we're able to stop a lot of that additional exposure that's being created every single step of the development process.
What's your best advice to organizations about how to go about doing this? Because frequently, you know, senior managers will come down and they'll give the sermon, but everybody kind of stands around after that and says, you know, well, that was nice, but how do we go do that? So is there some best practices or some success here that you've seen people implement?
We have, our goal has been to make us very frictionless and very easy to use. And, that's what we've really spent the past 2.5 years doing, is just honing in on a product that is very easy to use. So, like I mentioned, our goal is not to have, developers to become security experts by any means. And so, advice to organizations is, as you're starting to look at the adoption of IAC, which, most companies are, it's just, some companies are adopting a lot faster than other companies. It's just, the whole digital transformation story that you're very aware of. And so, some companies have made a decision that all their new applications will be developed in the cloud using IAC. My advice to any of those companies is, take a look at, a product like Oak9, because you can really bake in security at the very beginning of your development process versus thinking about it, building up all the security debt, and then having to worry about it post-deployment.
Do you think that the Biden administration's executive order is helping this whole situation? It seems like it's very focused on federal agencies, but will enterprises kind of follow suit?
I do believe enterprises will follow suit. As larger government agencies continue to bake in security, make that a high priority for them. Other organizations are also realizing that, with all the security threats that have happened over the past couple of years, especially, during COVID, we saw a huge spike during that time, is, now is the time for enterprises to take a harder look at security. And what we're seeing as we're talking to companies is, even though, the market's a little bit rocky right now, security budgets are still holding very strong just because of the need to make sure that, their environment is fully secure.
How did we get to this situation? I mean, back in the day, there was always a cybersecurity review of stuff deployed on premise, and then we decided to chuck that essentially when we moved to the cloud. Are we developing applications too fast right now, or is this unsafe at any speed, or can we keep at this pace and make things more secure?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point that you bring up is, what we've seen is, throughout, the adoption of the cloud, developers have been given all the different products and tools in the world to go as fast as possible. Unfortunately, what's happened is during this time, security professionals have not gotten the same type of love out there, right? They haven't gotten the same type of technologies to help them support this fast adoption. Now, I don't think, if you were to talk to any developer, I don't think anyone would say, slow down my development process, or we're developing, we're developing too slow. I mean, everyone wants to, develop as fast as possible. A couple of reasons behind that. I mean, you look at the market today with the invention of SaaS products out there, it's become very, very competitive. You get the right developers in place, you start building out the right technologies, and you can go, develop at the speed of light. And it's a very competitive situation. So it's how much technical debt do you want to take on is really the question. And look, we talk to a lot of born on the cloud companies that their sole focus is to get their product out to market. And security is more of a secondary notion. But once, their customers are beginning to ask them for security guardrails and things like that, that's when we're having, pretty healthy discussions amongst our companies, because they're realizing that there's a definite need to bake in the security at the very beginning. And that's where we're seeing a lot more adoption.
Do you think at some point, I mean, you mentioned that we have this chronic shortage of security professionals that can't keep pace with the app dev projects, but do you think that AI might someday save us from ourselves, and how smart can we get with all this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, products, such as ours that have intelligent learning built into it, right? So we understand that, okay, the developer accepted this code change, but decided not to do this one. So it's slowly picking up, right? And I think AI will definitely help, but, there's also always going to be a manual need. I mean, you won't be able to automate the security engineer professional by any means, because there'll always be new security phenomena that come out there. There's going to be different types of hacks that occur out there. So you're going to need still some manual processes. At the same time, though, you layer on the AI, it gets you that much more secure.
All right. We have been talking about DevSecOps for a while. Do you think that over time we'll just go back to DevOps and we won't necessarily put the word sec in the middle of that? It's a little cumbersome, as they say, and security will just be part and parcel of everything we do.
Yeah, I mean, DevOps, DevSecOps, there's multiple different buzzwords that keep floating around in the industry. But, the way one thing that we're seeing is actually with larger companies is they're starting to, actually have in their development team security champions, right? So these folks are really tasked with making sure that things are secure, but they're more from a developer standpoint. So it really is that DevSecOps persona. Will we go away from that? I mean, at the end of the day, if it's DevOps or DevSecOps, I think the goal for all companies, it should be to develop securely throughout the development process, so you're not dealing with it at later stages of your development lifecycle.
All right, Raj. Well, as they say, from your lips to God's ear, hopefully this will all work out. Hey, Raj, thanks for being on the show.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, back to you guys in the studio.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throwaway here with Dalton Horowitz, who is Principal Developer Advocate at logs.io. And we're going to be talking about the dark side of open source software. Dalton, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here, Michael.
All right. So what is the dark side? Because everybody and his brother thinks, open source software is the gift that keeps on giving. So what are the things we should be on the lookout for?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm a big believer in open source. I'm an advocate of open source software and open standards. And so I'm definitely all in favor of using open source. But my point is that many people treat open source as just a license and are unaware of other aspects of what open source means. So they find some tool that is of open source license, Apache, MIT, BSD, we all know these licenses, and say, okay, I'm fine with that. But then again, you can wake up one day to discover that your, database that lies in the heart of your system is suddenly relicensed. And what used to be Apache 2.0, for instance, open source license, all fine and well, is suddenly a non-open source licensed database. And then what exactly are you supposed to be doing? And the database is a good example because it typically is in the heart of your system. It's a critical, mission critical component. So it's definitely not a convenient situation to be in. So these are sorts of situations that I'm trying to make sure that people are aware of.
This seems to be happening more frequently because there's tension between the developers of the open source software and the people who provide cloud services using it. So there's a lot of folks changing the licensing terms right now to make sure that all the money doesn't quite flow to the cloud service providers. So do you think we'll see more of this?
Yeah, so definitely we see more of that. And when you say people, unfortunately, oftentimes it's vendors. So it's commercial entities that decided to go down the open source path, but then at some point couldn't, build a sustainable business model and came to a situation they perceive as competitive with obviously with their commercial competitors utilizing the same open source. So definitely we've seen several of those in the past year or two by very prominent open source projects such as Elasticsearch, Grafana, Loki, and others. And these are because of the great community around each and every one of these. Obviously, this makes the circle of impact of such decisions to relicense or otherwise modify the project very impactful for many of the community members.
Yeah. Do I need a tool to help me do the financial analysis of that impact, or am I just looking to discover the instances of where I have this software and then I can figure out what the impact is from there?
So I would say that it's very important to understand how, first of all, when you choose, let's say you vet a new tool, or even if you use already, if you're already making use of some tools or platforms, it's also valid to make this assessment. First, understand the licenses, because even within the open source realm, not all licenses are born equal. Some licenses are, for example, GPL licenses are copyleft licenses that have an infectious nature. And there are, as I said, the categories like Elasticsearch and MongoDB and others that are not open source at all, but they sometimes get confused because It's a Foxpen source license. It's what some people call it source available license. So because people see the source code, they assume it's also open source, but source available is not open source by any means. So it's very important for people to first understand the types of licenses and make the distinction, and then find the right license to them. And then understand also, as I mentioned, who's behind the open source license. Because as I mentioned, it could be a vendor that is close to a conflict with a cloud vendor or something like that, that this tension may roll into some decision to relicense or otherwise modify the access or something like that. So I would say these are the prominent steps to understand what's the license really about, who's behind the open source, and maybe the last piece is what's the governance policy behind that. So who can actually impact, who can grab control, obviously, ultimately, who can make a decision such as a relicensing or other material decisions. This is in the evaluation stage, and then maybe we can touch upon when utilizing open source, what you can do to keep as safe as possible in that respect.
Who is in charge of tracking these licenses? Is it really the developers, or is it somebody else in these organizations in the finance team who should be responsible? Where does the onus for figuring all this out really lie?
So on the licensing front, definitely you need to consult with your legal department to understand the fine print in the licenses. I'm not a lawyer myself, and even though I know quite a bit about open source licensing, I go myself and consult with the legal department. But then, as I said, there's also the aspect of how to manage that in a day-to-day. And usually this falls under the realms of what typically is known as the dev and DevOps practices. And when software is being updated, for instance, oftentimes developers want to do as much automation as possible because the stacks are being more elaborate, working in cloud-native environment and so on. But automation has a price, and if you don't put the right gating within the process when you upgrade to check that maybe the license has changed, and while upgrading you may find yourself in an awkward situation with a new license, this is something that needs to be taken under advice. So, with all due respect to the automation, the CI/CD pipelines, continuous delivery, continuous integration, you need to put the proper gating, just as you do for security and cyber concerns. Same for, let's say, licensing exposure, being very clear in making sure that you get the right licensing. And if licensing changes, this needs to be addressed, stop the process of upgrade and take the right consultation. And also manage the third-party license exposure, because sometimes even a small component within your system may have a license that is infectious in nature, that is a copyleft license that may impact your broader system without you intentionally planning on doing that.
Do you think that people will wind up swapping out open source software components because of these licensing issues, and that becomes something of a major DevOps headache when that occurs?
I think that it's definitely a concern to many organizations. For example, in the case of Elasticsearch, that used to be a very, very popular database, many have turned to different alternative paths to remain in the open source path. And actually, that was the story behind OpenSearch, a new project that came about. It started as a fork of OpenSearch of Elasticsearch and Kibana, and now is an independent project under Apache 2.0 open source license. And people migrated from Elasticsearch to OpenSearch just to remain within the OpenSearch realm. And I think the awareness will grow. I'm not saying that people will stop using open source. Definitely not. People like open source. Developers like open source. They trust open source. But we need to mature up in the way that we look at open source tools and frameworks beyond the license, understand the complexity, and make more intelligent choice and the vetting, and also more intelligent use of that, making sure that we manage our license compliance checks, manage the licensing exposure, and so on. And by the way, it's important to say it's not just material for vendors, it's also material for other open source projects. For example, the CNCF, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, has issued a directive to all of its open source projects not to use, for example, AGPL licensed open source, because that contradicts the licensing directives of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. So even another open source tool may be impacted by being imposed by licensing that it did not intend to utilize. So it's definitely a concern both for vendors and for other open source projects.
Are all these licensing models sustainable, or do we need like a summit where we all come together and say, let's sort this out once and for all?
I think there's enough of a variety of licensing for vendors to choose the right path for them. Some more, let's say, least restrictive, like Apache 2.0 and MIT, and some more restrictive. But I think that the more important concern on the vendor side is to understand that open source is not a business model. If a vendor decides to go down an open source path, the vendor needs to understand open source means that others can utilize that, can modify, can take it to their own needs. It could also be competitors. So the model needs to be sustainable in a way that the open source can have its own community and its own value, where the commercial part has its own independent value, independent of the open source. It could be a managed version of the open source as a SaaS. It could be additional enterprise edition with additional guarantees, or many other models that exist out there. But the business model needs to be well constructed, not to drive this conflict between the competitive side in the business and the community side of the open source.
Do you think there needs to be some sort of gate in the DevOps process to evaluate the licensing before developers just start make something part of a build? I mean, how do I go about managing this on a practical level?
Definitely. That's exactly what I'm trying to advocate for people when vetting a tool or a framework. It's not just about something being shiny and sexy, and I've heard the other startup next door using it. It needs to undergo a very meticulous evaluation. Obviously, for the technology, the technical feature side, the aspect that is taken for granted, but also for the licensing aspect. And there we need to loop in the financing, we need to loop in the legal, as I said, and also on the DevOps side to understand if this is something sustainable as part of the ongoing continuous integration, continuous delivery flows, if it's something that they can actually integrate easily, and the licensing model supports the licensing scheme of the software that is being hosted, whether it's another open source, as I mentioned, or a closed source, and understanding the broader picture, who's behind it, which, by the way, not only vendors, let's be honest, it could, open source can go astray also with an individual contributor behind it. We had a very famous unfortunate incident with Node.js frameworks, Colors and Faker, that went astray with rogue commits that broke the libraries because of financial constraints on the side of the maintainer behind this project. So having a single maintainer is also a single point of failure. And this is also something that is less desirable. So understanding that there is a diverse set of maintainers that can sustain it, that is not held by a single entity, a single vendor, for example, that the governance policy makes sure that no single entity takes ownership, and there's very clear and transparent way to make material decisions in the project, such as relicensing, but also other decisions such as promoting maintainers and who has access to review PRs and other aspects. So governance policy is a material part of open source, not just the license itself.
All right. So I think what you're kind of saying is that open source software is like that proverbial free puppy, right? So there's nothing quite free about it. You got to maintain it and pay for it as we go along. So do you think people understand that that's the level of commitment that they're making?
I think that what's confusing about free is that the free is not free in the sense of doesn't cost anything. Free is in the sense that you have the freedom to take it and make use of that as you see fit. And this is what gets people confusing, because they said, okay, I get a free software. No, it's not free. you need to invest. You need to invest in the skill set within your company. You need to invest in your CI/CD pipelines to integrate it in an intelligent manner. But if it's true open source, then you can take it and you adapt it to your needs. You can invest in what we've done, for example, in my company at logs.io, to adjust it to exactly customize it to our needs, to our customers, to our workflows. And that's the beauty. You have the open source at your availability to modify, not just to see that's the source available, but to actually take it to your own use cases. And that's the magic. When you have that in the hands of skilled software engineers, you can do wonders.
All right. Hey, Dodan, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you very much, Michael. Pleasure.
All right. Back to you in the studio, folks.
Hi again, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed today's episode of Techstrong TV. We had some outstanding interviews with Alan at RSA, as well as a special RSA edition of Techstrong Women with Charlene and Tracy. We then had a great interview between Mitch and Tom Barton, as well as two amazing editions of View with Vizard. I hope you all enjoyed this episode of Techstrong TV. We'll be back on Monday, so I implore you to please join us for that. Once again, thanks for joining us today, and we hope to see you again. Stay strong, Techstrong.